Okay, let me do this one quick thing. Okay, I believe we are live. All right, welcome back to Three-Peat Sports, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Monhay, and welcome back to the second annual NBA Trade Deadline Reaction Show. We'll be here for the next 3 hours as we wait for the trade deadline to come about. And right when I start the live stream, we get the bad news for really us NBA fans that the Bucks are indicating to teams that they're going to keep Giannis. So that's really the big domino that we were waiting on throughout this entire trade cycle. And it's a shame in a lot of different regards because we ultimately were expecting just a big trade in that uh, throughout the NBA sphere, as far as like a big star uh, to the extent that Giannis is. We just don't really see those types of trades come about willingly. You know, we see the the Luka Doncic trade from last year that came about as a complete surprise. This one was in the making since the moment Damian Lillard tore his Achilles, and it's a shame that he's not forcing the issue over in Milwaukee. And it's a shame for Milwaukee in that they're going to be put in a really difficult situation in this offseason where they are going to give Giannis more control, a little bit more leverage in terms of his ability to dictate what package ends up going out for Milwaukee to um, allow Giannis to end up in a more preferable situation. And it is difficult. It is a shame to see that. But they're going to continue to try to make other moves throughout this deadline season. They're supposedly in discussions to go get Ja Morant, which I wouldn't be totally fond of if I was a Milwaukee Bucks fan for sure. And I did see another trade come up. Okay. The Bucks and Suns agreed to a deal. Cole Anthony and Amir Coffey for Nick Richards and Nigel Hayes Davis. Okay. So we get rid of both of those guys. I'm curious if the Suns keep them both, because I do like Cole Anthony. I remember when I first started the podcast 6 years ago, one of the first things that I talked about was the my infatuation of the Suns getting a point guard at the time, a point guard of the future. And one of those players that I brought up was Cole Anthony. And uh, he got bought out by Memphis last offseason after the Desmond Bane trade. He ends up going to Milwaukee on a minimum contract. I do want to see what he's averaging this season because it's weird. Both of those guys are pretty good players, all things considered, given, Amir Coffey was a player that had always been like a hilarious Suns killer for the last 2 or 3 years, as far as, being a good 3-point shooter goes and being a longer 6'8" defender. Okay, Cole Anthony is definitely having a down season, but I also think that's just him playing behind a player in Ryan Rollins who has broken out pretty tremendously. You take a look at Kevin Porter Jr. being their second leading scorer, which is hilarious when you think about what Milwaukee has been trying to build around Giannis for the last couple of years. But I know that's a trade for Phoenix where they're trying to create some salary cap relief. I know that they're probably gonna convert one of their two-way guys, whether that be Isaiah Livers or Jamari Bouye. I've personally really liked Jamari Bouye in Phoenix this season. He has reminded me a little bit of like a Lou Williams light, and it's been fun to see the development of plenty of those guards over in Phoenix this year. But again, it's a salary saving move for the Suns. As for the Bucks, I also don't think they're going to do much with them. Nick Richards is a fine backup center, really a third stringer. doesn't have the floor spacing capabilities like how a Bobby Portis does, and he can be frustrating as far as screen setting and just setting a bunch of illegal picks. I feel like he gets 2 of those every other game. And as like a dunker spot player, being in the short corner and perhaps coming in for basket cuts, I do think that that's an area that he can be pretty solid in for sure. But I think this is just a big old nothing burger trade for the time being. It's nice that it's a Suns trade to kick it off and a Suns trade that okay, a Suns trade that we can just get out of the way. I was very irritated last trade season when they ended up doing the Yusuf Nurkic trade at like 11 and completely disappointed me in that regard. But it's been an insanely eventful NBA trade season. Even if the trade season didn't really pick up until this week, we only had one trade happen through the first couple of months of the season, and I didn't really get my 2 cents out there yet as far as that trade goes. The Trae Young trade to Washington, and I know everybody has had their fair share of feelings and emotions about that deal, but I didn't have the opportunity to share my 2 cents, so I'm going to do that. You take a look at Trae Young, and you understand that he's an extremely flawed basketball player whose efficiency has dipped quite a bit over the last several seasons now. Where I want to again take a look at Trae Young's year-to-year stats because this year it's fallen off tremendously. Like 19 points. Remember, he was once close to a 30-point per game scorer. It's a high assist output. He has always been around a 10 assists per game type of point guard. He, just like some of the other smaller point guards in the NBA that have lost value, like Ja Morant, Darius Garland, they are a bunch of pick and roll heavy point guards that are only able to operate in that regard and not much as an off ball threat, aside from maybe Garland, but we all know that he's better served on the ball. But yeah, a couple of years ago, 25 points, 28 points, 26, 26, 24, and now 19 points a game. Granted, he's played 10 games this year, but he has seen his efficiency, drop quite a bit 46, 43, 43, 41, 41. For a point guard that is as high usage as he is and takes the amount of shots as he does, it's definitely like it's off-putting, and especially next to a player in Jalen Johnson who expects a lot of movement around him when he has the ball in his hands. There's just not a lot of great meshing there, which was uh, something that I didn't really keep in mind when I thought about this Atlanta Hawks team going into the season. I thought that the defensive personnel, the length, was really good surrounding Trae Young, and that was his best opportunity to win in Atlanta. But now he ends up going to Washington. He's not going to play at any point this season. But when you take a look at or in Washington, but Washington has some very interesting things cooking up, and we will get to that Anthony Davis trade next. But for Washington, you have been able to turn the almost untradeable contract in Bradley Beal and his no trade clause, Kyle Kuzma, a depreciated asset, and a couple of other just outlier players, whether that be AJ Johnson or Marvin Bagley, and 2 first-round picks and some expirings, and you're able to turn that into Trae Young and Anthony Davis. I think that's really good business by Washington. And now they have a pretty um, guaranteed good backcourt with Young and Trey Johnson in the fold, and I really do like Trey Johnson for Washington. And we'll get to the Anthony Davis trade soon, because that just sort of wraps up my whole thought process when I think about Washington. But Atlanta, they get the couple of expiring contracts in CJ and Corey Kispert, and they're fine players, but it's nothing consequential for for Atlanta. They're not expecting crazy developments. They're doing this to get salary cap relief. And some of the other moves that they have made throughout trade season has indicated that to me as well. The Anthony Davis trade was completely out of left field. A lot of these deals, to me, with Nikola Vucevic getting traded to Boston, the Harden trade, a lot of these have come out of left field. And I would say the Anthony Davis trade was far more surprising than any other deal that has happened throughout trade season. And it doesn't look like it's official on like the NBA site yet, but we will take a look at the full details of the Anthony Davis trade to Washington that also featured Jaden Hardy, D'Angelo Russell, and Dante Exum for the expiring contracts of Chris Middleton, AJ Johnson, Marvin Bagley. I know that there's one more player. Give me 1 second to find the full details. We are almost there. Give me 1 minute. AJ Johnson, Malachi Branham, 2 firsts, 3 second-round picks. From Dallas's perspective, there's a level of disappointment, but there's also a level of relief. With the Anthony Davis trade, the Luka Doncic trade, there was always going to be that in the fans' head perspective of always comparing Anthony Davis to Luka Doncic. We all understand just how good a player Doncic is as far as being an offensive engine goes. And that was their franchise pillar. And they really have lucked into getting Cooper Flag and not making this a total clown show. With this move, they get a little bit more expiring contracts. And I think that was really the motivation behind this particular deal, where they were looking to get the salary cap relief, really start fresh, have some more draft capital, and be able to pursue something a little bit better and smoother when you're thinking about building around Cooper Flag and Kyrie Irving, of course. I don't really expect any of these players, aside from maybe AJ Johnson, to come out of this and being a long-term piece for that team. Even if I do like Chris Middleton to some extent, but I understand that he's probably going to get bought out, and you're looking at probably a just a total wait out period and see what you have in Bagley, see what you have in Branham, and see what they do the rest of the season. Pretty much give them a tryout. The first round picks aren't really real first round picks. It's a Thunder first round pick this year that is extremely likely to be the 30th pick in the draft, and then a Warriors 2030 pick that is top 20 protected. And we have no idea what that's going to look like, that Warriors team in 2030. I think they just got those first round picks for the sake of saying that they received first round picks. It's disappointing in that end for Dallas. They're always going to be haunted by that deal, but I think that there's legit avenues now for Dallas to build a more complete roster around Flag and Irving. And I have very much made the case to a couple of people that it's far easier to build a roster and a contender around the skill set of Cooper Flag than it is to build around the skill set around Luka Doncic. Now, we can go back to Washington. You're now going to feature just a really interesting defensive identity, defensive core around Trae Young and Trae Johnson, where you're going to have Anthony Davis and Alex Sarr being the two guys in the paint. And I think that just poses as something really interesting, where Anthony Davis, one of the best defenders of our generation, he's going to be, I think he should definitely stay a little bit further into the paint. I don't really want him going out to the perimeter like how he once did, because, he's just gotten hurt so much. And, there's a reason why he went for just expirings and some protected first-round picks, because you just don't know what it's going to be like with the with the amount of missed games that he's had and how much worse it's going to get as he gets older. Which is why I think it's totally fine for them to trade expirings and, no picks of their own to go ahead and create a core that features Sarr, Davis, Johnson, Young, Keyshawn George. I haven't even mentioned he has broken out this year as a really interesting point forward type of player where he had the ball in his hands a lot more this year than ever before, as if he didn't play last year. But 15 points a game, 6 boards, 5 assists. His efficiency went up greatly after what was just a hilariously inefficient season last year, where he shot 37% from the field. That's up to 45 now. On similar 3 points volume, his percentage is up 32%, from 32% to 38. He's taken very legitimate leaps. He has good length to be bothersome, and he's, a bigger, thicker wing. And I think that just bodes really nicely for a Wizards team that has employed a bunch of tweeners like Branham, like AJ Johnson. It's a nice breath of fresh air for them. Now, I am curious what that means for the developments and where they're at with Bilal Coulibaly, who was the 7th overall pick a few seasons ago. But they are providing Trae Young and Trae Johnson with a pretty interesting defensive infrastructure, and they're going to be competitive next year. I like their buy low options. And if it doesn't work out in the end, they didn't give up anything consequential. They're very likely to get pieces back similar to the pieces that they gave up to get those players in the first place. So I think Washington is doing really good business over the last couple of weeks, several months, really, dating back to last offseason. I really liked their draft. I really liked Trae Johnson coming out of the 25 NBA draft. So we'll just have to remain patient. I look forward to seeing how this team gels next October. Okay, the Boston Celtics trading Chris Boucher to the Jazz. That's a big nothing burger trade. We knew that Chris Boucher was going to be gone, especially after he had missed a large majority of the season, and the rise of Nehemiah's Queta as their starting center. He has looked like a legit most improved player candidate. So Boucher was very expendable, and I'm pretty sure the Jazz will buy him out, similar to how they're going to do with Lonzo Ball, who got traded to Utah yesterday. But let's continue on with the NBA trade season. Let's go to the Jaren Jackson Jr. trade. That one also completely threw me off, and that was a name that none of us really expected at all to be thrown into the mix. We knew that teams were going to be interested in him. We knew of Boston. We knew of Atlanta. We knew of Golden State as a couple of teams that had been checking in. And that's the wording of the reports: check in on these guys and see where they end up going. But Jaren Jackson Jr., John Conchar, Vince Williams, and Jock Landale head over to the Utah Jazz. The Jazz send out Walter Clayton, Taylor Hendricks, Georges Niang, Kyle Anderson, and 3 first-round picks. I think it's good on Memphis to continue going deeper into this sort of rebuild period. I think when you look at when they made the Desmond Bane trade last offseason, they got an expiring contract and 4 first-round picks. Some people take that as, oh, they were offered up 4 first-round picks. That should be a deal that they take. But when you take a look at the overall, landscape of the team, and just there wasn't really a clear-cut piece on this roster that would smoothly replace what Desmond Bane brought as a 40% three-point shooter with some legit creation ability and, fine enough defense along the perimeter. They go ahead and go into the season starting Cedric Coward, who is a prospect that I liked. And, from there, you were able to see Ja Morant's usage go down quite a bit. The percentages go down quite a bit. You see a lot more defenses wall up on him. You understand that Jaren Jackson doesn't have the greatest creation ability, even if I think that he has taken steps in that regard. He's not the efficient three-point shooter that we had made him out to be. When you take a look at just the overall direction of where that team was going, they were going to be in that mediocre stage for as long as they were going to have this version of Ja Morant and this version of Jaren Jackson and a bunch of developing pieces that haven't really gone anywhere. I think that it was the smart move for them to try to sell high. And I don't think that you have a clear-cut headliner. Walter Clayton hasn't played much this season as far as, being a big minutes getter this year. He's only averaging 7 points, 3 assists, shooting below 40% from the field and about 31% from three, 18 minutes a night. We understand that the developments of Keontae George and Isaiah Collier were going to take over really any minutes that you were planning on giving to Walter Clayton, so he became a little bit more expendable. But that was a player who really popped out onto the scene during the tournament in Florida's championship victory in March Madness last year. And you were able to see the creation ability. You were able to see him operate well in pick and roll. You were able to see him operate well off of the ball. He just looked like a player who knew exactly how to play his role correctly. And I think that's a piece worth developing for Memphis. Same with Taylor Hendricks. I want to take a look at what I wrote up on Taylor Hendricks a few years ago. I remember liking him quite a bit throughout that draft process. What was he drafted? 23? Yes, he was my number 6 prospect. Really, I had him that high. I'm glad. I'll probably talk about my draft process and how I watch these guys. But it's definitely evolved because in no world would I ever have Taylor Hendricks over Amin Thompson throughout my draft process again. But Taylor Hendricks, I compared to, shades of like Tari Eason and Mikal Bridges. Pretty much, I said that he would be everyone's favorite role player by the end of the scouting process. 6'9", 7'3" wingspan. He looked like the first year, he looked pretty damn good as that glue piece, being this extremely lanky defender that moved well all across the court. I really liked what we were seeing in the 40 games that we got out of him, um, especially defensively speaking. And he shot 38% from three on, low volume, about 4 attempts a night. But I liked Taylor Hendricks coming out of that draft, and then he broke his ankle a few games into last season, and we just have seen a lot more wings on this team be added to the roster and emphasizing those players' developments over Taylor Hendricks. But Hendricks, I like that gamble. I like the size. I like being able to bring back that piece for Memphis, who I think would fit in very well with just the history of that team, the culture that they've developed over there. Kyle Anderson, George Niang are expiring contracts. There's nothing too crazy to talk about there. But the 3 first-round picks that they're able to net back along with them makes sense for the timeline that they're trying to go down now. They're going to transition this team to Cedric Coward and Zach Edey for the time being and see how exactly they're going to cement themselves as pillars. But for the time being, you're going to emphasize their development over everybody else's and then reevaluate in the offseason. They have 7 additional first-round picks added to their arsenal, and I think that's just very solid business by Memphis, recognizing the hole that they're in the Western Conference and just figure out where to go as a franchise from here. Utah, I'm fascinated that this was their buy now option, or at least buy for the future, bringing in Jaren Jackson Jr. You have a very interesting lineup now that features 3 7-footers between Jackson, Lauri Markkanen at the 3, and Walker Kessler, who they're expected to bring back next this offseason, he becomes a restricted free agent. I expect him to be back in Utah on a contract extension. I do wonder the where exactly the inclusion of Ace Bailey comes in, if he's going to play a little bit more as a 2 than as a 3 or a 4, which is where I really had him projected. I think for me to be extremely comfortable with that, I would like for Ace Bailey to develop a little bit more of a handle. And he has been a fine ball handler. It's not to say that he's bad, but one of the biggest issues that I had with him throughout the draft process last year was the space creation, how he settled for a lot of really difficult jump shots during his time at Rutgers, and it led to some inefficiencies. Some of it I blame on the fact that there wasn't really a whole lot of floor spacing surrounding him at Rutgers, or surrounding him and Dylan Harper. I also think that he just has a tendency to settle for those really difficult mid-range jumpers, and he was efficient. He was really efficient in the mid-range that in his lone season at Rutgers. But I do think that him being able to not have tunnel vision to as much of a degree as he did at Rutgers will be important for his overall development as a player that ultimately has superstar potential. Like, you see the shot making, you see the length, you see the athleticism. He can absolutely do some damage as an offensive player and being an offensive creator. It's just space creation. It's being able to pass out of the double teams that I expect him to garner. And if he's able to do that, you have a really interesting core with uh, 4 players in the lineup that are above 6'9", 6'10". I am curious just how much the money on the books disrupts what they have been trying to develop. They will likely get another first round pick this year in the top 8. If it ends up outside the top 8, I get really fascinated by how they end up going about roster building going forward. Right now, Markkanen is getting paid $40-50 million. Jaren Jackson's getting paid about $50 million. He just signed an extension with Memphis. And you're going to have to pay Walker Kessler in this offseason. You are going to have to pay Keontae George at some point real soon here. That's just where the money being tied in becomes really fascinating and really interesting. On the surface level, though, I do talk about the seven footers, and I do talk about the defensive versatility that comes with that. Markkanen isn't really much of this this rim protector. That's why he moved over to the 3 and has really become one of the I don't really want to say elite, but this season he has been an elite shot taker, shot maker. 28 points per game on some really good efficiency, which was something that, I had talked about in the last episode, just how important it was for him to become a shot maker, not a shot creator, and how to find a role for him in that regard. And he has really answered the call there. But that's a 7-footer with length that can move his legs pretty well defensively when he has to. Walker Kessler is way more of your stationary, inside the paint rim protector. And he has always been that, really, ever since he entered the league. I remember when they first got him as part of the Rudy Gobert trade, and he played the first, 15, 20 games of the season, and he was a large part in the Jazz being one of the surprise teams of that first month or two of the season, because he was just really effective as a rim protector. He averaged like 2.5 blocks in his 70 games that year and has consistently averaged about 2.5 blocks throughout the large majority of his career. And it's because he plays a pick and roll really well. He has the length and the strides to make up for the athletic deficiencies that he may have in his game. And I just think he's really well coordinated to play up on those pick and roll situations or alter shots to as much of a degree as he does. And then you add in Jaren Jackson Jr., who, as a defensive piece, is fascinating because he's not a good rebounder. You're able to see that in the way that he moves. You like that he is light enough to move as well as he does, and I think it's why he hasn't really added much weight. It's because you like the versatility that comes with him moving all across the court. But he is a player who just gets bodied, boxed out really easily. And when you take a look at just his overall frame, you understand that you need a bigger five next to him, which was why Memphis had the idea of having Zach Edey there at the center in Memphis. Now you have Walker Kessler, who I just think is a far better rim protector. It's not to say that Zach Edey is bad. I think he's a really, really good rim protector over there. But you have also just the added insurance of another 7-footer in the lineup, and I think that makes for the weak side rim protection ability of Jaren Jackson just a far bigger asset over here in Utah. As far as the other players go, I mean, John Conchar has been a part of that Memphis team for a long time now. I think he originally came onto the scene as one of those, you know, early Memphis days of, gritty culture setting over in Memphis, just being one of the tougher guys out on the court. Um, he was also just a solid 3-point shooter through the first couple of years of his career, and that was how he ended up getting, a 12-ish million dollar contract and being, in high volumes or in low volume situations, he was able to perform well, but his percentages have really dropped and fell off over the last a couple of seasons now, and that's just a salary inclusion. I think the same could be said for Jock Landale, who they ended up shipping off to Atlanta for cash considerations. Vince Williams, I'm really fascinated by. He was a player who came onto the scene in 23 as a rookie, being a really aggressive defensive player where he was picking up 94 feet. He was uh, being a very legitimate chaser around the court throughout his rookie year. And I thought that, oh, this is a really, this is another piece that goes ahead and becomes one of the interesting development pieces that might have a legit role here. I mean, he played 28 minutes per game a couple of seasons ago, and that's how he got his, I think it was like a $10 million, $12 million contract extension. He's played the most minutes he's played since, that really bad Memphis season a few years ago. And you're having some issues as far as his 3-point shooting goes, which really ever since the bad year in Memphis, he hasn't really uh, improved upon his 3-point shooting. This year, he's only at about 31%. So you envision him as like a dunker spot player right now, but I envision that they want him to be essentially their Taylor Hendricks on this team. And if I'm going to take a look at the rest of the Jazz roster right now, as far as those types of players, Bryce Sensabaugh is a 6'5" wing. That's pretty small. Cody Williams is a 6'6" guard. Svi Mikhailuk, 6'6" small forward. They don't really have anybody of this size and defensive prowess to match, what they are going to lose from Taylor Hendricks. So I think he becomes an interesting piece for Utah now, as they, brace for potentially losing their first round pick this year. But I think it's a fine deal for Utah. I am curious how much that much money being tied to Markin and Jackson, eventually Kessler, eventually George, how that becomes a bigger issue going forward. But I become really fascinated by the development of those three in particular. And if Ace Bailey is able to develop the way that you hope, oof, it becomes really fun. And you have visions of how this team can be a pesky team and a very pesky team come really playoff time. I can definitely see a world where this becomes a legit playoff team that nobody really wants to face. The Pelicans trade Jose Alvarado to the Knicks. Dalen Terry, 2 second-round picks in cash. So they acquired Dalen Terry yesterday as part of the Gershon Yabusele salary dump. It's disappointing to see Yabusele become what he has become. He was really good last year, really efficient as a 6'8" center. He comes over to New York, and the efficiency just absolutely plummets. And it is just a shame. It really is a shame to see, um, what was really a feel-good story. He was coming off of the Olympic run with France, where he really stood out, gets the contract by Philly, plays really well, gets a $10 million contract by the Knicks, and now he's just a salary dump um, to a mediocre Bulls team that we'll have to talk about. They are really hilariously built right now. But that's besides the point. Jose Alvarado to New York feels like a a pairing that had been talked about really since last summer, as far as backup point guards go. They lose campaign. They expect Tyler Kolek to make a large jump. And really, Tyler Kolek has been fine. He's had his moments of being a really fun, uh, microwave shooter, is how I would describe it. But his efficiency has been good. It's just clear that he doesn't really have the trust of Mike Brown at this moment in time, um, where it becomes interesting. He's a player who has only averaged like 14 minutes a night, and when you look at Mike Brown's overall philosophy, it's being able to go 9, 10 players deep into the rotation and playing a very balanced style of basketball. And I think he's played a very balanced style of basketball here for the Knicks, being somebody that can play off of Jalen Brunson and be able to spot up in the corner. I think some of it is just athletic deficiencies and creation ability, because a lot of his points are going to come off of, you know, transition, fast break, or catch and shoot spot up situations, which is fine, but he hasn't really had the volume or the touches necessary to do so. And it's understandable when you're playing next to McBride and Brunson, Bridges, Anunoby, Karl Anthony Towns, of course. Um, Kolek is a fine player. Kolek is a fine player, but they bring in a little bit more insurance in Jose Alvarado, who ends up going to New York. Jose has been interesting as well. I'm not sure what to make of his overall defensive impact. I know that he has, his fun um, GTA style steal in the backcourt, but him as an overall defensive piece, I mean, he's just light. He's just a really light player, a much more slender type of point guard. That's, I think he's tough in the chest, but I also think that there's certainly a ceiling that comes with a 6'1" point guard being able to guard out on, 6'5" players even. So, I think the defense becomes a lot more wishy-washy to me, but he is a player who has really been a good shooter throughout the large majority of his career. 35% from three is average, yes, but he is able to make big shots in bigger moments, as far as, he can play off of Jalen Brunson as well. He can go ahead and go with a pull-up three-point jump shot in transition. I think that level of shooting and that level of efficiency is far more steady, especially when you take a look at the likes of a player like Jordan Clarkson, who they brought in the offseason. That trade just hasn't really worked out, and a lot of that is because Jordan Clarkson has the tendency of wanting to cook. He is a legit creator in very many different respects, but that what comes with being a creator of his style comes a lot of really inefficient games. And you can completely understand why they felt comfortable just taking him out of the rotation completely, upping the minutes of Diawara and McBride, and why they just completely shut him out of the rotation. They have something a little bit more steady now with Jose Alvarado. It's nothing to be truthfully excited about. Does he play in a playoff setting for this team? That remains to be seen, unless, he gets really hot from three. I don't envision that. I think those minutes will go to McBride. But again, this is a move for New York that adds some point guard insurance, and I think is very much well worth it. I think New Orleans did well with this too. They get an expiring contract. I think they really should be looking towards a reset with that roster. I've never seen a roster go, 13 and 39, 13 and 40 with no first round pick this year and go ahead and say that they have this unprotected or this protected of a roster, this untouchable of a roster. And I think that is the wrong decision for them. But when you take a look at just their overall position, them being able to acquire an expiring, be able to create a little bit more space this offseason, I think that's important, especially when you're a team with as many assets as they do, whether that be Zion Williamson, Trey Murphy III, Herb Jones, even Yves Missi. You can envision just having the ability to acquire better assets, whether that's in the form of draft picks or young players. You're able to see a world where you're able to take in more of that because you have expiring salary coming off of the books in the offseason. That's where it becomes interesting to me. Ultimately, Dalen Terry hasn't really gotten a lot of burn, a lot of run. He might get a little bit over here in New Orleans as a former first-round pick out of Arizona. Um, but there's really not much to say there. A lot of this is for salary purposes and for that second-round pick. Um, so fine for New Orleans, pretty decent for New York, and we'll see what his impact looks like in a potential playoff setting. I do want to take a look, just see where we're at as far as the other trades go. Even when Giannis doesn't get traded, you're able to see just a bunch of comments about how they were never serious. Did they ever get a serious offer? Okay, so that spot the Suns will create will be for Jamari Bouye. Nice. Nice. Okay, let's go to the Boston trade with Chicago. Anthony Simons and a second-round pick to Chicago for Nikola Vucevic and a second-round pick. I found it interesting that Boston gave up a second, and I found it interesting that that was the center that they decided to land on, because Anthony Simons was a player that I loved the trade when they made it last offseason, Anthony Simons for Drew Holiday, just a straight player swap. I thought of Anthony Simons' just three-point shooting ability and how much he bombs from beyond the arc, and how that's just a perfect fit. It's a beautiful fit next to for Joe Mazzulla, who is a coach that believes in the numbers game, the math game. If you make and take a lot of threes, you're very likely going to win a lot of games. And he was playing that pretty beautifully here, coming off of the bench behind Peyton Pritchard and Derek White. He was averaging, 25 minutes a night. He didn't start a game, but was, 14 points a game, 40% from three on 7 attempts per night is really freaking good. And, something that you really can't make up if you end up trading him away. You can make that up in the form of, somebody else taking 7 more three-pointers a game, but you're probably not going to get that same efficiency like how you did with Simons. They did try to go after a couple of other centers, whether that be Yves Missi or Ivica Zubac. That was the big player that they were going after. Yeah. Sorry, I was reading a bunch of tweets in the middle of all of this. But when you take a look at Vucevic's fit, you are very understanding of the type of player that he is. He is a player who has this very frustrating moments as an offensive piece. It's a lot of pick and pop with him. It's not a lot of post ups like how he once was when he was with Orlando or his first season with Chicago. He has had his moments of being pretty efficient from beyond the arc, and you can imagine, a floor spacing center. Who did they have last year? They had Kristaps Porzingis in the starting lineup. They had Al Horford for what feels like a decade. They value the floor spacing aspect from their big men. And from beyond the arc over the last couple of seasons, it's been good. 40% from three last year on 4 attempts, 38% on 5 attempts this year. I think that's pretty good floor spacing, if you ask me. Will that number get to 7, 8 3-point attempts? No. And it shouldn't with a center like that who has pretty solid touch around the basket as well. You can envision a world where he can be a decent um, screen setter, creating space for the likes of a Jalen Brown. You have to respect that type of floor spacing and offensive ability that Vucevic has. What you have to do is be able to make that up with legit defensive pieces that will guard along the perimeter because Vucevic has never been a defensive minded player. He is a guy who will stay further in the paint, but you can also he's also just really slow recovering on those picks, whether that's if he plays high, he has a difficult time recovering to his man. It's a full switch when that happens because he really doesn't have the coordination to get back to his big man in, drop coverage or anything of that nature. And you can't really have him play too low because that's going to give, a shooter a lot of space to shoot. And usually it's a really late contest if he were able to get one up at all. But that is definitely the biggest issue with Vucevic, and that's where having a player like Namaya's Keta go ahead and be um, important because he is a big body. He is somebody that's a lot more coordinated from a defensive front. They have a playable and a lot more viable of a center rotation, a lot more than what I envisioned entering the season. Would I have given up Anthony Simons to go get a center that's as flawed as him? Not necessarily. But you also get, an expiring contract out of it. You're just getting a cheaper expiring contract in this regard. Have them duck a little bit below the tax. They'll have some pretty solid cap space in the offseason as well. And I think that's something that you have to keep in mind with a bunch of these trades that happen. A lot of it is going to be for salary cap relief and trying to duck underneath the tax and avoiding aprons and whatnot. It's just uh, a lot of the trades will be boring conversations if you just talk about money and whatnot. But that's what this is. They get themselves a decent fit at the center position for Boston, and I wouldn't be surprised if they continue to look to buy. Continuing to scroll, I am curious. Like a lot of my stuff on my feed is all Suns stuff, and I'm just sitting here really wondering if Anthony or Coffee end up getting cut. I hope Amir Coffee doesn't get caught because I do really like uh, I like his length. I like his overall shooting ability. I think he's a very smooth player for sure. But the Bulls' perspective on that trade, I thought they made out pretty well with that deal. I think Anthony Simons, you can definitely still flip if you're Chicago, and I think they definitely should be looking to flip one of these guards because, gosh, they have way too many of them. They have way too many guards on the roster. They had that issue before when they had Giddy and Kobe White, when they had Caruso at one point on the roster, Zach LaVine at one point on the roster, Trey Jones. I want to find the tweet. I probably won't be able to find it. But now their guard rotation after all of the trades today, which includes the Io Dosunmu trade to Minnesota, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. It is Giddey. It is Rob Dillingham. It is Jaden Ivey, Trey Jones, Colin Sexton, Anthony Simons. That's just too many of them. It's just way too many of them. But a couple of those guys are pretty legit assets now, if you're really thinking about it. Simons and his three-point shooting and his creation ability offensively is something that I think teams should be going after. Even with this transition period of the league going away from smaller guards, Anthony Simons stands out quite a bit because his overall offensive game has become really fun to watch. He can, put up a nice floater. He can work in pick and roll. He can be a good pull-up shooter. He can play off of the ball as well. I like Anthony Simons quite a bit. I'm not sure if that stays put here in Chicago, because ultimately they should be looking towards the future and looking for players with size and players who can create really well, as far as size goes, or even defensive pieces. That's going to be important when you're talking about having Josh Giddey and Montez Buzelis as your two franchise cornerstones. But at the end of the day, they also just get an expiring contract for they get an expiring contract out of this as well. They swap it, they end up swapping seconds. They get the better player out of the deal, and they have an opportunity to get a little bit more if they truthfully wanted to go buy and try to get somebody else onto this team. You understand that the fit next to Giddey would hypothetically be a pretty damn good fit. At the same time, you just had Kobe White, who is a better player and a better, he's a better player with the same fit. As far as comparing White and Simons next to Giddey, but it's good business for Chicago to go ahead and sell high, and they sold pretty damn high. This was a very good return for Chicago. And I also think you understood that you weren't going to get a first-round pick out of him either, like how they ended up giving up all those years ago when they originally traded for him in the 2020 season. But Chicago made a bunch of other deals. I mean, we don't really need to talk about the Yabusele, Dalen Terry dumping. They just take on an extra year's worth of money, which is not what a rebuilding team should be doing. They shouldn't really be willingly taking on that money unless they're getting heavily incentivized. But that's just it's inconsequential. Eventually, Yabu will be off of that team. Not this season, but probably in the off season, maybe next year. We'll see what happens in that regard. Trying to see if I missed out on any trades before I get onto the other moves. The Bucks called some teams this morning, shared their willingness to take back minimum contracts. Definitely still looking to buy and add a piece next to Giannis this year. Yeah, that's disappointing. I was really hoping that we would come on to the show and to really go crazy about, Julius Randle becoming I don't know, like becoming a Phoenix Sun or, well, you understand what I'm getting at. It's just big trade, bring in Tyler Hero, somebody of that regard. Okay. The Bulls traded Kobe White yesterday. That was a 3-team trade, if I'm not mistaken, with the Thunder. They ended up roping them in to essentially include and dump Usman Jang, who was a lottery pick a few seasons ago. It was Kobe White, Mike Conley. I forgot they got Mike Conley. We'll get to when that trade happened. Mike Conley, Usman Jang, going to okay. So Mike Conley, Kobe White goes to Charlotte. Colin Sexton, Ousmane Dieng, and 3 second-round picks go to the Bulls. And Mason Plumlee and a couple of second-round picks end up going out to the Oklahoma City Thunder. Plumlee is likely going to be waived, and I don't think that's anything. Ousmane Dieng, we understand, was never really going to compete for any minutes here over in OKC, so he gets himself a little bit better of an opportunity, especially when, they tried to add a player like that, the Bulls. They bring in Ousmane Dieng, that archetype of player, after just drafting Noah Asenge in this past draft, who is another one of these long, lanky defenders that has the tools and has um, the fluidity to be, a pretty interesting offensive and defensive chess piece, even from a shooting perspective, but has never really panned out into a rotation player for OKC. And I think that Chicago very clearly is very interested in trying to find a player like that for this team. So I think they'll develop him there. Colin Sexton, I believe he's on an expiring. Yes, he's on an expiring contract. So they bring in, more cap relief there. And, Sexton is a good piece as well. He was a player that I thought Utah gave up pretty, I wouldn't say quickly, but they sold low on him, in my opinion, when they traded him and a second for Yusuf Nurkic, which was just a deal that I had never agreed with. When I talked about Colin Sexton and the acquisition by Charlotte last offseason, I just thought that that was a nice piece to add, especially when the plan the whole time was to, have as much floor spacing as possible next to LaMelo, next to Brandon Miller, having some interesting ancillary pieces. Now, his skill set definitely, it was a little bit redundant to the likes of a Trey Mann, who, they had just extended as well. But Sexton is just a little bit better of that score, a little bit more efficient of a scorer at 6'2". I want to say he's 6'2", 6'3". Somebody that can get to the rim, somebody that is a highly efficient 3-point shooter throughout his career, about 39% from beyond the arc at about 4 attempts. He's one that prefers to get into the paint and, throw up floaters or even just attack big men. He has the athleticism necessary to be that type of guard. But averaging 14 points, 49, 39, 88 shooting splits, 4 assists, 2 boards, about a steal a night in 22 minutes. It's pretty solid. You also understand that this is likely not a long-term piece next to Giddey, next to Buzelis. That's completely understandable. But again, a lot of this is for, the picks that they have and, bringing in more picks. The issue with Chicago making this deal, or really any of their previous deals, is that they have sold too late. Zach LaVine last year was probably their best. It was probably their best chance of selling high on a player in Zach LaVine, and they only got back like a second round pick or two. They didn't get a first for DeMar DeRozan. They didn't get a first for Kobe White or Vucevic, who was having a good season last year, or Alex Caruso a few seasons ago. They just, they wait too late to sell off their guys, and when they sell high, they go left field. They go in a direction where they are banking on developments, where they haven't really shown to be a team that's been good at developing good players or great players that stick around on this team. When was the last time that has truly happened? You could probably argue Kobe White, but once they made the Giddey trade, you understood that they were going to go in a little bit of a different direction. But again, this is it's decent value. They get some more expiring contracts. They get incentivized with second round picks, and that's just what this franchise should be doing. They shouldn't be, and I'm glad they haven't been going out and trying to bring in, I don't know, Anthony Davis. I remember when they were involved in those rumors for a little bit. I'm glad they didn't do a move like that this trade season. I'm sure that they would have liked a little bit more out of Kobe White, especially when you take a look at a team like Minnesota that had been needing a guard of scoring prowess or defensive prowess for a little bit. I would have liked for them to have gotten, a bunch of picks out of Kobe White. They waited until he became an expiring, so that's why the value is an expiring contract. But they're doing good business by getting off of a lot of money and creating more avenues to add different pillars to Chicago. From Charlotte's perspective, I like it. They have been really good this in the last month. Charles Lee was a hire that I was really high on. I remember talking about just how heavily praised he was as an assistant coach for the Bucks as far as his defensive game planning and his overall suggestions to the defense goes. He gets hired on to Charlotte, and it never really felt like there was a clear-cut culture or connection with him and the players that were there. It's really come around this season where you're seeing a lot more um, I wouldn't say efficient play. I would say mature play is how I would put it. You're not seeing a bunch of street ball from your two cornerstone stars. You are seeing, a lot of pick and rolls. You're seeing a lot of double drags. You are seeing a lot more inclusion of the rest of the team when, you know, it was clear that they wanted to go in this direction last year. When they made the Mark Williams trade with the Lakers, I understood instantaneously the vision that they had when the headliner of that trade was Dalton Connect. And when you take a look at, what Con Knipple has been for this team, you understand that there is a need for a little bit more spacing. They wanted to have a lot more spacing, Charlotte. They have that with Knipple. Brandon Miller and LaMelo have been really fun, high volume shooters slash scorers for this team. And it was always about the ancillary pieces. And Kobe White is an interesting ancillary piece in that Kobe White is one of the 3 to 5 fastest guards in the association. And that's in the form of, it's not necessarily straight line speed, it's his ability to, you know, read and instantly attack. If there's a defender that's playing a high and he ends up going uh, into this size up situation, he knows, he goes really from 0 to 80 instantaneously, and it catches defenses off guard. And I think that's a really interesting like an interesting archetype of player to have next to LaMelo Ball. I do think that he ends up starting in this starting lineup here for Charlotte. I think that you incorporate that speed into some really interesting point guard situations because Kobe White, as well as he plays off of the ball, he, I think, is a legit point guard with legitimate passing ability, and that doesn't go hand in hand with some of the other pundits that have spoke about Kobe White, but I think that he's a very legitimate passer of the basketball, and I think he leverages his speed and his shooting ability to make some very good reads out of those situations. He creates some pretty decent shots for others, and that's just a really fun piece to add next to a Hornets team that has really been on the come up this year, and it's fun to say that because it feels like we haven't said that about this Hornets team in more than a decade. But I really like this move for Charlotte. If they're able to retain him in the offseason, that's very much an A-plus move. I really hope that they're able to retain him. It's a very fun fit. Now, Mike Conley is not going to stick put in Charlotte, of course. He'll get bought out, but how did they get Mike Conley? They acquired him in a 3-team deal with Detroit and Chicago. Chicago originally got them. But it was essentially a salary dump by Minnesota, where Kevin Herter and Dario Saric end up going to Detroit, and Jaden Ivey ends up going to the Chicago Bulls. And I like that move quite a bit for Chicago. I think that's a really interesting high upside play. He was what was he, the 5th pick a couple of years ago. He reminded me a lot of John Morant coming out of Purdue. I know that I wasn't too great in regards to riding up on these players a few seasons ago, but Ivy was a guy who just was extremely athletic. I think he was really fun as far as just getting to the rim, playing on the break. But I also found like his shooting ability at that time to be really fun to scout, because that had been an issue with him during his first year at Purdue. Then that went up, and in Detroit, he really wasn't much of this floor spacer. Very similarly in the way that we talk about John Morant and his floor spacing, it wasn't really impactful, his spacing ability here for Detroit, and I think that proved to be an issue next to Cade Cunningham, who was a little bit more of the inside the arc scorer as well. I think that with Ivy and his overall development, I think a lot of that is going to have to come with his playmaking abilities. As well as health. He broke his ankle, broke his leg last year, and was limited to 30 games. He was having his own breakout season, averaging 18 points per game. He was in the middle of his best season, and he breaks his leg. He doesn't really have instilled confidence by the coaching staff to repeat what he was doing last year. And I think that there's still a piece of him that's trying to get rebuilt. When you are this highly athletic guard and you have a major injury like that, you can see a world where they don't really utilize the athleticism in the same ways that they used to. And I think that's ultimately where the barrier is for Ivy right now. He went from a 30-minute per game starting guard and a pillar of a franchise, one of the pillars of a franchise, to 17 minutes a night, 6 less shots per game, and ultimately being a part of just a dumping in the way of just not wanting to pay up in the offseason. They allow Chicago to do that. I think this is a good buy low situation for Chicago. I think that this was, when you consider Kevin Herter having a down season from a shooting perspective, I think he's only shooting 31% from 3. I think that's a good return on investment, especially when that was just he was a contract filler as part of the Zach LaVine, De'Aaron Fox swap last year. And I think that was a savvy move by Chicago to bring him in and just see what you have in him before he enters restricted free agency. See if you want to have him be a future pillar for this team. But that's really to the extent of like the interesting stuff of this trade. Kevin Herter, he would be far more interesting if he was shooting it a lot better this year. But again, 31% from 3 for being the level of shooter that we have touted him of being, a 37% three-point shooter throughout his career, and he was coming off a year where he was shooting 38 last year with Chicago. It's just been downhill for him, really ever since his, after his first season with Sacramento. It just hasn't really been the same level of shooter, and I don't think that type of player is much of an asset for Detroit. And I find it interesting that all they were able to do with it is those two expirings and Herter and Saric and a first round pick swap, especially when you consider what the asset of Jaden Ivey was used as in potential. Ooh, I saw that reconnection. We're chilling. um, but yeah, you take a look at the uh, what he was being included in the first place, and it just wasn't. This isn't the value that's any fan really expected of the Detroit Pistons of valuing him at, and it's disappointing in that regard. But it's two players that are expiring and aren't really good at this stage of their careers, and they just did it for the first round pick swap. That's all they did. That's all that they did. Minnesota did that to just try to create some cap space, and originally all of us thought, oh, that would be for a potential Giannis Antetokounmpo trade. No, it was not, in fact. And, we still have about an hour and a half before the trade deadline. But right now, the expectation is that he stays put in in Milwaukee. And they did end up making a pivot move um, earlier this morning by trading away Rob Dillingham, Leonard Miller, and 4 second-round picks for Ayo Dosunmu. Minnesota really did well with a move like this. Ayo was a second-round pick a few years ago. He came in during the offseason in which they brought in Lonzo Ball and DeMar DeRozan, and he came onto the scene as a very fun offensive piece where he was shooting 38% from three. You're able to see some interesting athleticism be used. He averaged 9 points a night, 3 assists, about a steal a game. He is just an interesting guard. I think, yeah, he's 6'4", 200 pounds. I want to say he has like a 6'8", 6'9" wingspan. Yeah, he's a 6'10" wingspan for a 6'4" guard is abnormal. It's very abnormal. And over the previous couple of years, he looks like a little bit more of a depreciated asset in that his scoring went up, yes, his efficiency went down quite a bit from beyond the arc, and it has just been a fluctuating thing throughout the large majority of his career. And when you take a look at uh, just the level of player that he can be when he is at his best, you're getting a really good, you're getting a good shooter, you're getting a good defender, somebody that legitimately plays the point of attack, somebody that can be a really good chaser. He is a very good uh, chess piece on the defensive front, especially since he has the length necessary to do so. That inclusion in Minnesota is interesting because that is the exact archetype of player that they had last season in Nickeil Alexander-Walker. He ends up blossoming into this 20-point per game scorer for Atlanta. And I say, good on Atlanta for bringing that in. But, Minnesota very clearly missed that archetype of player this season. It put a lot more pressure on the likes of Anthony Edwards and Julius Randle to some extent, or even Jaden McDaniels. Is it Jaden or Jalen? God damn it. It's got to be Jaden McDaniels. Yes, it's Jaden McDaniels. But it put a lot more pressure on those guys to be, better shooters from beyond the arc or be a little bit more high volume. They don't have the trust in Terrence Shannon. They didn't have the trust in Rob Dillingham at all throughout his career here in Minnesota. And you look up and down the rest of the roster for Minnesota, as far as guards go, like it's, Bones Highland, who's played well this season. I will give him his credit there. A two-way contract at one point for Minnesota, and um, he has been pretty good here. He has really taken over that backup point guard role a little bit more consistently. But Mike Conley wasn't getting, the same amount of minutes as he was the last couple of years. They gave his starting spot to Dante DiVincenzo, who has been extremely impactful for this Minnesota Timberwolves team. But who else were you going to trust offensively aside from DiVincenzo and Edwards from a guard perspective? They didn't have that in Shannon or Dillingham. They were never going to task Johnny Juzang with that. Joe Ingles isn't going to play. Leonard Miller isn't that. And Bones Highland, you're liking the development, but you can't fully give him the reins as the backup guard for this team. And Io is just a really good replacement for what they lost in Nickeil Alexander-Walker. It's disappointing that they didn't get the developments they were hoping out of Rob Dillingham, who is one of the main reasons why I have moved off of a lot of my my original philosophies as far as watching prospects. But Dosunmu is a really good player, and he's averaging 15. He's averaging 15 points a night for the season. Dosunmu. That's going to go down with as many offensive options as they do have, but he has the skill set necessary to be a really, really useful and a really good player for this Minnesota Timberwolves team. That's a large improvement to what they had previously, which was players that they didn't trust. And they're going to send, those players that they didn't trust to a team that is working with a clean slate in Chicago again. Again, Rob Dillingham is another guard, and it's so many guards here for this Chicago Bulls team. But Dillingham, I want to continue to believe in, and I think I will continue to believe in him. But he definitely has changed my mind quite a bit on the draft process front. He's a small guard. There's really no other way to put it. 6'1", 164 pounds. You see how much energy he has to exert when he is playing out on the basketball court. From a shooting perspective, from just being able to keep up with these types of NBA players, it hasn't really looked like he's adapted to this change yet. He still absolutely can. And I still see the spurts where he can go on a little bit of a hot streak, where I can see him shooting on the dribble, off the dribble. I can see his creation ability. Everybody notices that. I think he can still be really useful as an offensive piece. Now, to the extent that I envisioned when I thought about his potential, no, absolutely not. But I think an interesting best case scenario would be like an Anthony Simons. You really do have to look at some of these off ball guards. And, if you're a smaller guard, you sort of have to create your value in that way. I also think that the confidence thing with him in Minnesota really got to him. And a lot of that is just simply put, it's the fact that he entered a winning situation, which, I liked Minnesota going ahead and making a move like that in the draft, trading away that first round pick to go get Dillingham. try to insert him in a winning culture and a winning development program and just see what happens. I do think that he was a raw prospect still. He needed a little bit more refinement to his body, and was somebody you had to be patient with, especially if you were Minnesota. And they really weren't all that patient with him. He would play, a 4 or 5 minute stint coming off the bench. You could tell how hesitant he was in Minnesota, and that was because he knew that if he was going to, be out on the court, if he made one mistake, it was very likely that he would only have one more short shift during the game, and that would be it. He comes over to Chicago now, where it's essentially a clean slate. We know that Chicago is selling off a lot of their players. We also know that they acquired too many guards, and I think that's where a little bit it could be a little bit problematic for players like Dillingham who still need the opportunity um, to showcase what they have in their repertoire, in their skill set. So I hope Chicago's able to, either ship him off for another piece, or just allow him to, have a little bit more of a showcase, because that's what you're doing with acquiring a player like that, acquiring a player like Jaden Ivey. Showcase them and see what exactly you're going to do with that player, that asset moving forward. Leonard Miller was another guy that was a part of that trade, and I'm trying to remember if he was in the 24 draft. Okay, no, he wasn't. But I remember being a fan of his game, being a little bit more of a uh, he was like a big four that you could play as a backup five, who really hasn't gotten much burn with Minnesota. I want to take a look at what exactly his career stats is. Yeah, 6'10", 220. He's a thicker body there for Minnesota, and has had his interesting shifts, is how I would describe it as. He's only played 49 games, hasn't really gotten much burn with Minnesota at all. But I'm very much able to see a guy that can be an interesting defensive piece if you're able to develop him right. I think that Chicago did pretty well with this trade as far as assets go. You bring in more second round picks, and we will see where exactly they go with their, they go from 5 guards to 5 new guards, is how I would describe it. Jackson Miller, what's going on, my man? Do you think Ja gets traded? I'm actually going to keep that question up because I think that's a good question, especially with all of these sellers out on the trade market, or at least the seller that Memphis has become. My first gut instinct is no. We both talked about it, and I don't mind sharing that to the audience. We both talked about Miami being a team that he lands with if he were to get traded. But the more that I think about how Miami has gotten into this process, it feels a lot like clockwork, as far as, Miami has really they've tried to recapture the magic that came with the Shaq trade all those years ago, 2 decades ago. And then at that point, they're trying to recapture the magic that they had when they brought in, LeBron and Chris Bosh, and that's really what they're hinging on. They're trying to find essentially their Shaq, and I don't think that they have viewed Ja as that. I think what they have done is put out those reports of, "Hey, we're interested in Ja Morant if we don't get Giannis," as a ploy to go ahead and make Milwaukee a little bit more nervous about the potential um, of pivoting away and Miami sending out other assets for a different player. That pressure clearly hasn't worked so far. I am very interested in seeing um, like, I think if they were going to make a trade, Miami, it would be for Giannis, and that would be it. like the more that I have thought about it over the last couple of hours. And they're gonna probably end up with nobody, Miami. Like it feels hilarious that they're keeping up the bits of, oh, we're really interested in this player, and then they try to play the media game, and then the media game doesn't go their way, and they try to save face at the end of it. If if he were to be traded, I I really do believe that Milwaukee would do some hilarious things to try to keep Giannis in Milwaukee. And I think that's really the only other option if Ja were to get traded. But at this moment in time, especially since we are about an hour without a trade, um, I don't think that Morant gets dealt at this deadline. I do think he does get dealt eventually, but I do think Ja has to play over the next couple of months in order to, try to rebuild a little bit of his previous value and see if they can sell a little bit higher on Ja Morant going forward. I do like that question though, because I think that, a player of, that man's stature and ultimately one of the guys in the thumbnail, um, that's a big time player. It's a player whose value has been up and down throughout the large majority of his career, or is, the last couple of years, last 2 years. It's just been a fluctuating thing as far as his value goes. I'm sure the ceiling is way different now given where the league is headed, and I think that's why a lot of teams are so hesitant right now. I do think that he's a good player and that um, he has a ceiling being a smaller athletic guard, but I don't think that he's a player who is this negative of an asset. I think you could definitely rebuild his value, and I think that's why I think Memphis would probably look a little bit more towards keeping him and trying to rebuild that value going into the offseason. Okay. How many trades left do I have to read off? Talked about Kobe White. I'll look through the total notifications here. Again, if you guys, keep shooting me questions. I really liked this. Really like this. Do you think Ja gets traded question? If you got more hoops questions, send it in because we're in a little bit of a dry spell right now. Yes. Kaminga. But still, continue to send in more cues like that. I like that. Appreciate you, Jackson. Appreciate you and Isaiah for tuning into the show, man. Jonathan Kaminga, Buddy Hield, late last night, getting sent to Atlanta for Porzingis is just a really funny thing. A really funny trade in so many different regards. After all the talk of, Kaminga being this damn near untouchable prospect, and then him eventually butting heads with the Golden State Warriors organization, and just so many of different regards there. And uh, then all of a sudden you want him uh, just as an asset, but you don't really want him because the coach doesn't. And you essentially try to hold him hostage, and you threaten to keep him. You play him a little bit, you play him not a lot, or not at all. It's just been a really funny Kaminga situation, and then now you try to include him as the headliner of a Giannis trade, and this is what you end up with. I think it's just a really funny turn of events. If you're talking about just where exactly the Warriors ended up going down, and I think that's just they did a master class as far as showing how to depreciate an asset. But Kaminga and Buddy Hield to Atlanta for Kristaps Porzingis. From just a on-court perspective, if we're leaving health completely out of this, that's exactly like the type of center that uh, Golden State would have loved, especially during the prime years of Steph Curry. having that level of floor spacer, having that level of size in the starting lineup is a really fun thing to have for Golden State. You can imagine pick and pop scenarios. You can imagine just how interesting of a um, offensive chess piece that is. And then defensively speaking, it would allow for Draymond to continue to be his Swiss Army knife self. Porzingis isn't that type of unicorn anymore, but he's certainly still a very effective rim deterrent, even at this stage of his career, where it's concerning where he's at this point in his career, and I think that's why a lot of the conversation is going to stem from the fact that he's not just an expiring $30 million contract, but it's the fact that he has continuously had this illness that has uh, completely taken him over for the last calendar year or so. He's limited to 17 games this year. He was out for what felt like a month last year due to an illness. He's only playing 24 minutes a night this year. It's very concerning right now with the health of Kristaps Porzingis, and I don't think you really have many other avenues to go with this conversation for Porzingis other than that and being an expiring contract. Even if I know that it's a good fit and that it would work out, there's just a year-long sample size of this whole thing not really working out as far as health goes. Atlanta getting Kuminga is really funny to me too. I think that this type of team is really the worst, one of the worst, personnel groups as far as including Jonathan Kuminga as one of the, your main players on the roster. I think Jalen Johnson has earned the right to be the franchise cornerstone, and I think there's some things that are a little bit redundant as far as just downhill ability. But for Kuminga, it's so much more different in that, you know, you hear fans talk about him not being a good NBA player. And to some extent, I disagree with that. To a larger extent, I know where they're coming from in that it's not a refined game um, that he has developed so far. Right now, his game is a downhill game where he goes into the chest of defenders and maybe it's a floater, maybe it's a dunk at the rim. He has the athletic tools to be really good and really good in the right role. But right now, he expects his role to be essentially what, you know, Giannis was in his prime. And I know it's a stretch to say that, but just being this downhill threat. But right now, he doesn't really have the floor spacing attributes necessary to be the player that he thinks of himself of being. He doesn't have the playmaking chops at this stage of his career to warrant the type of touches that he expects. He goes downhill with the intention to score, and in sometimes he's good in that regard, sometimes he isn't. But he doesn't really have much of a counter if he gets walled off, because right now he's not a good mid-range shooter. He's not an effective high volume shooter, let alone low volume shooter in the NBA so far. A career 32%, 33% shooter. This year's only shooting 32 as well. His percentage inside the arc has dipped every year of his career, going from 60 to 59 to 58 to 51 to 50%. That's just not good enough if you're going to continue to be um, this player who continues to get downhill and score in the paint. And defensively, the focus is extremely inconsistent. Earlier this year, when he was starting games, it looked like he bought into a role. Once they started losing games, he essentially became that way again. That same inconsistent defender, that same player who has inconsistent focus throughout the large majority of his career. Kuminga has a lot of work to do to become the player that he says that he is right now. If he's able to reach, these lengths of being a decent playmaker out of those um, downhill situations, I think there's an interesting career arc there. I'm very much out on him being a number one, number two, him as a three. If he's able to buy in to whatever role he has, it'd be really nice. But with the personnel that's surrounding him that features a guy who continuously goes downhill and expects, legit spacing. When you have Nikhil Alexander Walker here, um, even like guys like Onyeka Okongwu, that's a player that continues to go into the paint. He's on a very interesting linear career arc right now. I think Kuminga is just not the greatest of fits here in Atlanta. And unless he goes ahead and uh, shows legitimate improvement in his play for the rest of the season, like I just view this as a way of shipping off an expiring salary um, for a depreciated asset and hope that it ends up going up. Or maybe they treat that as an expiring salary. At the end of the day, they have a team option with Kuminga. And then Buddy Hield, we all understand what Buddy Hield is at this stage of his career. Just one of the better snipers in all of basketball. You have an interesting, it's the same up and down type of season that he has had throughout every season of his career, where he starts off the season shooting really good, really well, like, 48%, 47% from three. And then he'll have his stretches of being unplayable and losing confidence for the next month. And then for another month, he goes back to the mean of being this 40% three-point shooter, 38% three-point shooter, being effective in small areas. And then come playoff time, you're damn near unplayable. That's been the entirety of his NBA career. And that's going to continue to be the case over here in Atlanta. He might be the one to have the Luke Kennard role, who they ended up shipping off earlier today to the Lakers, and we'll talk about that soon. But Hield at this stage, you know what you're getting out of him as far as a shooting perspective goes, as far as how a season's worth of Buddy Hield goes. And this is a move for a team that has, been a little bit lower in the standings throughout a large majority of this season. I believe where are they at in the East? They're ninth in the East. They have a losing record at 25 and 27. They are still good enough to be a play-in team, but I think this is just another one of those situations where they just recoup a bunch of the expirings that they have and try to test the waters out a little bit more with younger players and see what they can do with a new pillar of the franchise in Jalen Johnson. Did the Sixers win the Jared McCain trade? Hmm. I forgot about the Jared McCain trade. It was one of the interesting buy low options for OKC, and ultimately, I thought that was a really good deal by OKC. So much so that I would peg OKC as the winners of that. Eventually, they're going to have to ship off all of their draft picks at some points. They can't just keep you know turning 15 different players into this roster. I don't think it was a bad trade for Philly either. They're not the winner of the trade to me, because I would have liked to have seen the development of Jared McCain a little bit more, especially coming off of a season where he has the injuries that he does. But I understand why Philly would end up making a deal like this, where they could get themselves a lot of draft capital from a team that has so many assets at their disposal. They were able to come out of that trade with 4 picks, and I don't blame them for making a deal like that. I think that them being able to have those picks. Geez, I just dropped something. Give me 1 second here. Uh, all right, my fault there. Um, for a team that has interesting contracts up on the board here, whether you're talking about Joel Embiid's $50 million, which, I'm not saying that they would dump it, but it's, assets to have. If you have to be in a situation like that, I think that they have. Let me look at the rest of this roster. Um, I want to look at this roster on like Fanspo because they are an interesting team when it comes to their salary. It's a lot of big contracts with not many, middle of the mark contracts to trade off. Aside from like Quentin Grimes, how many of these assets are going to be really, really effective or really good? If they wanted to make an upgrade to this roster, they have an avenue to do so. And they have an avenue to do so in the form of, having additional draft capital where you understand that McCain probably doesn't hold a lot of value at this moment in time. You're able to get the value that they got from a team that has had needed McCain's skill set, and two has so many assets at their disposal that trading away 4 picks isn't really consequential to the Thunder. It's the Sixers are a winner, but let's talk about it from the Thunder's perspective. I talked about it yesterday that they have been one of the more interesting offensive teams where they're just not the greatest of 3-point shooting teams, or at least high volume 3-point shooters. You understand that with a guy like Jared McCain, you're not going to get a lot of touches in the paint with him. You're going to continue to see him bomb from beyond the arc. And I want to take a look at just his overall career so far, particularly his first year. 6 attempts a night, which would be around that same mark for the player who attempts the most threes per game for the Thunder, which is just an interesting aspect there. Um, and that was in 25-ish minutes. And if he was able to play in that same role here in OKC or get those same amount of touches in OKC, I think that you could potentially see an increase in 3-point attempts, 3-point jumpers. But I like that skill set there for McCain. He's still a 38% 3-point shooter, granted on lower volume, not playing too many minutes. He's going from 26 minutes per game to 17, and far less efficient inside the arc, from 53% on twos to 39% on twos this year. Um, it's definitely a play on upside, and particularly from a shooting perspective, and an off the dribble perspective from a shooting front as well. I like the gamble from OKC so much so that I would peg them as the winner of that deal, but Sixers definitely are winners of that too. It was a nice sell-off option that they had at their disposal, and it's just more assets to have. You can't ever complain about taking 4 draft picks away from a team that has 40 of them. Haywood Highsmith. Okay. Still nothing in the last hour as far as trades go. Tyus Jones getting salary dumped is hilarious. He signed a $7 million contract in the last offseason with Orlando after a fine season. We'll just say fine season with the Suns the year before. I didn't think that it would ever reach, a point where it was this bad. Last year, 45% from the field, 41% from three, just a really invaluable um, shooter and ball handler on that team for Phoenix. His biggest deficiency was the fact that he was as small as he was, and that was always going to be the case. But he was never this one player where he leveraged the offense into attracting defenses to him. He's a fine player that will operate fine in a pick and roll situation that can make some decent decisions. But Tyus Jones also just has the worst defensive effort that you'll see from a small guard like him, which shouldn't be the case if you are that type of player where you're 6 foot. You need to have a little bit of effort on that regard because we don't see these small players be legitimate assets to teams. And that was certainly not the case this year, where he plays in 48 games, granted in a smaller role, but 3 points a game from 10 on 34, 29, 100 shooting splits is pretty ridiculous. And that 100% from the free throw line stems from the fact that he has only attempted, I want to see the totals really quickly, because I don't think he's attempted 6 free throws this whole season. And this is a player that was starting on a team last year that essentially promised him a starting spot and the ability to contend. They expected him to be a player to contend. And, you know, that just wasn't the case last year. And it's certainly not been the case this year. Orlando needed to ship him off, and they needed to create some room for a guy in Jace Richardson, who I have grown to really like as, a smaller guard that is able to score a little bit better than a Tyus Jones, and just see what type of developments you have in a player like that. So they were able to get back a couple of second-round picks, Orlando, and I think that's pretty good, especially when they just drowned themselves out of a good amount of assets in that Desmond Bane trade. I'm gonna go. Give me one quick moment. My dog is going crazy. If you have more cues, cue them up. But in the meantime, give me just one quick moment. I will be right back. Where are we at? There we go. There we go. We're back here. And aside from that, you just have a couple of salary dumps all over. I mean, Lonzo Ball getting dumped to the Jazz. He'll be waived. It's disappointing on the Lonzo Ball front. It was to me at least, it was definitely expected. This was a player that had missed out on 2.5 years worth of basketball. And, it's a big deal to go ahead and have a knee cartilage replacement surgery and having to essentially learn how to run again. You're essentially operating with a new leg in in a sport where um, you are losing a lot of your body is getting destroyed, is what I'm getting at in uh, in the NBA. The amount of injuries that these players play with throughout the majority of a season is very it's difficult to comprehend. And for Lonzo to have the surgery that he did and still be able to come back is anything, is nothing short of a miracle. But there was always this expectation that he was just never going to be that same player. And he hasn't been. And that's extremely disappointing because he was on an upward trajectory. Everybody knows that he was having a very elite point guard season for his standards during his first year in Chicago, where he, was a starter, 35 minutes a night, 42% from the field, 42% from three on legitimate high volume, 5 assists a night, 2 steals, a block, being one of the best defensive guards in basketball. It's disappointing to see, this sort of fall off from grace. He'll be released by Utah. And I'm just curious where we go from here with Lonzo. It is retirement, is a medical retirement on the table? Does a team try to give him another chance um, in a low usage situation or in a low pressure situation? Because at least in Cleveland, that was high pressure to go ahead and replace one of the 6 men of the year candidates in Ty Jerome. And he has been very disappointing this year as well from a shooting perspective. I mean, he's shooting 30% from the field. That's just that's not going to cut it if you are a point guard of, getting as many minutes as he did per game. Yeah, 21 minutes a night. That's just not going to cut it. We'll see what happens with Lonzo Ball in the rest of his career, but we're definitely getting closer to the end than we would like, and that's disappointing. It is very disappointing. Some of your other salary dumpings include Chris Paul going to the Raptors. He's not going to play a minute with the Raptors, but you also question, is this the end for Chris Paul? He's not going to play in Toronto. He'll get waived. Does any team pick him up? Does any team allow for him to have the retirement tour that he was hoping to get this year? That's really the only narrative that comes out of this. Really fascinated that the Clippers have the season that they do, where it started as bad as it did, and then they go on and become one of the 3 best teams since Christmas, and then they interrupt all of that, which we'll get to. I blanked on the Harden Garland trade. Let me quickly go over this deal beforehand. Ochai Agbaji's an interesting young player for Brooklyn. I think that he has like a little bit of Kelly Oubre to his game as far as offense goes. Inconsistent shooting, a lot of tunnel vision, but has the length to be a pretty solid defender and has shown to be a pretty solid defender at the guard spots. Brooklyn has done a really interestingly good job of taking on unwanted salary, taking on draft capital, like how they did when they had to recover from the disastrous Boston trade, where they acquired Garnett, Paul Pierce, and company. And Brooklyn's doing that sort of similar strategy again, and I think they've just done some really good business. The Harden trade was also one that completely came out of left field. I can't believe we're about 2 hours in and I freaking talked about Lonzo Ball and Chris Paul and Ochai Agbaji before him. Another one of those deals that just came out of nowhere. I remember, I was scrolling on Twitter and I see, this guy go ahead and talk about, nobody is really going to talk about the fact that, a bearded guy from LA is going to get traded for a braided guy from Cleveland. I check on the profile and it's, followed by a bunch of NBA players, a bunch of LA guys, a bunch of Cleveland guys, a bunch of reporters. And I'm like, whoa, like, you're not a reporter. Like, you're not mainstream enough at all. Who are you? And then all of a sudden, we're getting Sports Illustrated, Chris Mannix talking about, advanced discussions on a Harden Garland trade. And then Shams goes ahead and tweets something. And then they make the deal. Harden going to Cleveland, Darius Garland in a second round pick um, going to the Clippers. Huh. What perspective do we talk about it? Let's start from the Clippers' perspective because that's where it becomes fascinating. I like the fact that they were able to bring in a legitimately good guard. Like, I do think Darius Garland is good. And they were able to get some draft capital, even if it's just 1 second round pick. I do like the notion of, you're getting a little bit younger. We know that they're going to pivot off of Kawhi Leonard like maybe after this season, if not after next year for sure. They definitely have lined up these contracts to where they are giving themselves a 2-3 year window. And I think that's ultimately why they had to make the deal for Harden, because Harden was leveraging his play into another contract extension. He's having an elite season this year. He got an all-star appearance last year, and I didn't feel like he deserved it all that much given how inefficiently he was playing from a shooting perspective. He was good, do not get me wrong, but just way more inefficient than not. This year, he comes into the year scoring 3 more points per game, averaging 8 assists, 5 boards, 35% from three, 42% from the field. He's just having a higher volume season. And he's, I would say, the biggest catalyst as to why they were in the position they were in the first place, um, of winning, what was it, 16 out of 20 games over the last month and a half. He was the catalyst. As far as I know, they were way more together, way more. They looks like they had the continuity and the chemistry necessary to be really, really good, and they looked dangerous. They made Brook Lopez go ahead and look very playable. They made Chris Dunn turn way more into an effective player this year after, he started off pretty slow, just like every other Clipper did. Kawhi Leonard is one of the biggest beneficiaries of James Harden having as elite of a season as he has. And we saw in the first game yesterday with the Cavs and the Clippers, and seeing that with no Harden, obviously it's going to be different. And, they didn't have Garland playing, and the Cavs didn't have Harden playing either. But you're just very much able to envision how much more difficult it will be for the Clippers to be this really organized offense like how you had with Harden, because I mean, he's said it before. He is a system. He has everything be revolved around him. And that system is gone, and they're having to readjust mid-season as they start approaching towards the playoffs, and them expecting to be a playoff team. That's where it just becomes really, really difficult to see how they can adjust and continue this streak that they've had, because it was a really special run they were going on before they had to force themselves into a James Harden trade. But Garland on the surface is also a good player. He also has the unfortunate luck of being a smaller guard as well, with an injury history, whether that was a meniscus, whether that was a toe, a foot. He has had a lot of lower extremity injuries over the last several seasons. And that included a torn ACL when he was coming out of Vanderbilt, I want to say he was coming out of. But Garland on the surface is a point guard who operates just like any other older fashioned guard, where you're seeing a lot of pick and roll. You're seeing a lot of solid decisions in that front, a really beautiful float game, one of the tightest handles that you'll see from a guard, and somebody that is able to be leveraged in some regard. he attracts defenses with his shooting. He attacks defenses really well. I like Darius Garland as an overall player. Throughout the entirety of his career, though, he has been a defensive liability to the greatest extent, and that was to be expected. He's 6 foot, 6'1", one of the lighter players in basketball. But you are also able to see how a player like that will get picked on. You're able to see his efficiency definitely fluctuate inside the arc. You're definitely able to see um, just how these smaller guards will get disrespected in a lot of different areas. And this area is going to come in the form of, his playmaking. He's a good scorer, not an elite scorer. We'll actually say great. He's a great scorer. Like, he can do some really fun things with the ball. He can definitely create for himself, and I think he creates for others pretty solidly and can run an offense. He's not a system, and I think that's where I'm always going to come back to. We're always going to come back to that. And I think that Garland, as a guard, not being able to defend, not being able to leverage his scoring into elite playmaking, being that a 10 assists per game type of player will be difficult. He either has to increase his volume of shots or increase his volume in his passes, because having this nice mix is fine right now. But I think that being elite in one of those areas will be important for just the overall leveraging of the other star players on your roster, and that includes Zubats, that includes Kawhi Leonard, how that ends up gelling. I do find it fun to potentially see a Garland lob to Derrick Jones Jr. I think that will be fun. Otherwise, it's a large change. I do like that they're getting younger, and I like how they are beginning the transition into getting a little bit younger and trying to salvage everything that you've lost and trying to build a contender and a finals winner around Kawhi Leonard. Just this season, I can certainly see a world where they start losing a little bit more games than winning. And if it's the opposite, great. If it's the opposite, great. And they get an additional second round pick, which is important for a team depreciated of assets. But I think they did as good as they could have done in a potential Harden trade. Harden to Cleveland is interesting as well. They're implementing a system with James Harden going to Cleveland. Donovan Mitchell really pushed for this move to happen, and I find that to be really fun. I think that with Cleveland getting James Harden, you're getting a player who is the ultimate offensive leverager, is how I would put it. He knows how to go ahead and manipulate defenses. He knows how to create space. His floater this year has been far more effective than in years past. I think that he's been a really solid shooter as far as, the volume that he's taking those three-pointers at. We understand the defensive liability that he is. We understand the the playoffs not being historically great for him. I also think just him being this ultimate floor raiser for Cleveland, who was in the middle of a regression season after an elite season last year with 64 wins and break having that core four really play at their peak last season. I like Harden coming in here and having this level of playmaking with the level of players that are on this roster. I think them bringing in Dennis Schroeder and Keon Ellis bodes really well for the defense as far as their backcourt goes. I like The fact that he's still going to have Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley in the fold as far as rim protection goes. I like that he has a lob threat. I like that he has the amount of snipers that he has on the ball and off the ball, whether that be with Mitchell, whether that be with Max Strus whenever he comes back, or Sam Merrill, who has had a really good season this year. Essentially, um, he's just been really effective a as a shooter. I want to take a look if I'm able to find. Okay, I can't find catch and shoot stats at this juncture. But dude, 8 attempts per game, 46% from 3 is ridiculous. Having that level of shooter next to Harden feels like a cheat code. It just does. I do become curious about the length, the wings on this team. As part of bringing in Keon Ellis and Dennis Schroeder, they had to say goodbye to DeAndre Hunter, who was very interesting in his own right. And, that's another trade that we will talk about after this, where he was definitely one of the fake 3-and-D guys, where he was mainly a player who wanted to shoot and score and definitely had a low motor when it came to his defense. But was somebody when he was on, he was a good defender. Now, all of a sudden, your wings right now that are playable. Okay, it's Max Strus, but he's 6'5". He's a bigger guy at 215. He's a wider body. He's not uh he's not your typical wing. Keon Ellis is going to be essentially a 6'4" power forward in the way that he plays. Um, Jalen Tyson has taken a step up this year, and that's been a fun development for them. He's 6'6" and is a skinnier 6'6". He's been really good. Do not get me wrong, but that's not your typical wing. Neither is uh, neither is Strus. Neither is Ellis. You have Dean Wade, who I don't really think is a playable guy come playoff time. And I think with a team like this, that's essentially shutting themselves into a 2-year window to try to win a championship with Donovan Mitchell. This team is going to need some more wings. And I think that they will. I think they'll be able to do so in the offseason, given everything that they've done with salary moves and, moving and shedding salary. Just expect LeBron to be back there. I think you have to have that in mind when you're looking at the moves that they make and the expirings that they have. They're aiming for LeBron. They're going to be aiming for some more size from the wings. They're going to try to dump Max Strus. I feel very confident that that's the game plan heading into the offseason. But right now, they're a flawed team. They have a little bit more implementation to do, and it's a big change, and it's a tight window. How they end up faring in the Eastern Conference the rest of the season will be fascinating to me. How they end up faring uh, at the end of the off season, at the end of free agency, will be very fascinating for me too. I think we're going to see a little bit more turnover to try to keep Donovan Mitchell happy in Cleveland, try to secure a championship, try to secure something long term. Let's see. I did see a couple of just smaller trades happen. Okay, Eric Gordon getting salary dumped to Memphis. They're going to convert Dominic Barlow. He hasn't been bad as a two-way contract. He's actually been getting a good amount of minutes over in Philadelphia. That's not surprising to me at all. Who else could we look at? Hunter Tyson getting dumped. That's to make way for Spencer Jones to be converted. That's not surprising in the slightest either. Josh Minot getting salary dumped to Brooklyn by Boston. Again, you're going to see a lot of Yeah, it feels like we're going to be seeing a lot of these more boring moves the rest of the way. We're going to see a bunch of salary dumps, a lot of second round picks being incentivized to other teams. I'm sure that will be the case. Um, but yeah, absolutely. Should be a more boring. Oh shit. Oh shit. Oh man. Okay. Ivica Zubats, the should have been All-Star center last year, is getting traded to Indiana. Ooh. We're waiting for more details, but that's a big trade. Whew. So I'm assuming Ben Matherin. Ben Matherin's got to be a part of that deal. I'm gonna just wait for more details. That's a really interesting fit. I'm gonna quickly talk about DeAndre Hunter before we get the rest of these details, because all we're getting is the Clippers are trading Zubats to the Pacers among all of these reporters that are coming in. But you take a look at DeAndre Hunter, again, fake 3-and-D guy, who is a very fine offensive player, who was in the middle of a Six-Man of the Year candidate. He was like one of the leading contenders for Six-Man of the Year last year. And it was because he took a jump in his scoring ability, averaged about 18, 19 points a game. His low motor defensively is ultimately the reason why, Atlanta got rid of him for, a couple of pick swaps. It's why the Cavs were so willing to trade him away to to Sacramento, willing to take on the long-term money, which is funny on Sacramento's side of things. It also included Chicago, but they got Dario Saric and they ended up dumping him elsewhere. It's not that big of a deal. But for Sacramento, it's definitely confusing. This is a team that's not really. They gave up picks and took on long-term salary to do so for a player who is very flawed and having a down season this year. I think that when you are looking at uh, just the overall makeup of that Kings team, they don't really have many wings, and I think it's why they were comfortable of making a deal like that. But this is also a team that should be rebuilding, and that's an issue. That's an issue when you're taking on long-term salary. You're not getting back assets. You had to attach your most valued asset by the rest of the NBA to Dennis Schroeder, who you brought in last offseason to be your starting point guard. Now he became not your starting point guard, and you allowed him to be, um, you allowed him to be, your sixth man, getting less and less minutes, to a player who you signed a week before the regular season with Russell Westbrook, who again has had a good season. Do not get me wrong. But it's just not good process when they had a different price point for Keon Ellis the whole year. Now they have to attach him to a devalued, depreciated asset for a depreciating asset in DeAndre Hunter. It's not making a whole lot of sense in Sacramento's front to me, and that's an issue. That is an issue for me, for a team that's trying to sell off. They're not doing the proper things necessary to rebuild and sell off. The Cavs got really good. The Cavs, I like their play at Dennis Schroeder, who is in the middle of a down season, and really ever since he got traded from Brooklyn, his efficiency has definitely dipped. I do think that in a role like this, where I think he's just going to be a lot more useful on a team that's way more talented. I think that having that level of ball handler behind Mitchell and now James Harden is very invaluable. You take a look at the landscape of the East and how there's really not many, um, not just great teams, but great teams with multiple guards that are really playable. I think Schroeder is able to play based off of his uh, defensive playmaking as well as his um, his creation ability for others. I think that he can do some good things as far as, really being able to turn on the jets and go from 0 to 80. I think that he becomes a useful guard here, but the main prize is Keon Ellis, um, who has been a really interestingly fun asset as far as being one of the better shooters on ball and off the ball as a guard, being a defensive piece who was um, highly valued. He's a legitimate 94 feet defender. He is a very good, very fun defensive Swiss Army knife that we have seen him match up against, bigger bodied fours, which you don't really see out of many guards. But he is a longer guard. I believe he's 6 foot. I want to say he's 6'3", 6'4". Yeah, 6'4" with a 6'9" wingspan. That's really good. And he's able to play with physicality. He's able to defend 1 through 4 pretty effectively. And when you look at a Cleveland team that is really going to be hunting for uh, good defenses along the perimeter, especially when you have, a net negative defensive piece in Harden. Ellis is a very nice, like beneficial piece um, for that Cleveland Cavaliers team that's going to, they're going to be serious this playoffs, and he's of value. He's on an expiring right now, and I think that him getting an extension and a pretty penny as far as his extension goes. Um, I think that it's just a really good and savvy play to sell off of DeAndre Hunter and bring in two guys that I know will be very effective here in Cleveland in the situations that they're put in. The skill sets that they have will be put in a better situation in Cleveland that's trying to win now. Zubats to the Pacers really does move me. We still don't have any details as far as the rest of the trade goes, but I'm assuming Ben Mathurin. Give me one sec. I'm assuming Ben Mathurin is a part of the deal. Whether he's going to the Clippers or not makes it interesting. I would be fascinated by a Garland Mathurin backcourt. I would. I still have stock in Mathurin being an as good, efficient 18 points a night. Oh, Jesus, I can't. I see breaking again and on as I refresh my Twitter, and it's not Shams, but it's baseball news. I'm like, come on, Jeff, get off my page. So just to analyze that center rotation now, because I mean, I'm expecting Mathurin and Isaiah Jackson. Okay, so we know it's Ben Mathurin. Get out of here. Zubats is fit in Indiana. We knew that they've needed a center from the moment that they decided that they were going to get rid of Miles Turner, or the moment he signed with Milwaukee. We knew that they weren't going to be making a big play in the offseason because, I mean, ultimately, they were in a weird moment where, in the middle of a game 7 or before game 7, you traded for your own first round pick back. Halliburton tears his Achilles. Then the whole domino effect happens where you don't just lose your starting point guard, you lose your starting center. And they decided to go center by committee, which was something that I was interested in. I was very interested in Jay Huff, which is just a very nerdy thing to say, but Jay Huff is just one that spams a bunch of three-pointers as part of his just overall scoring repertoire. I take a look at um, just the way that he plays. He's a legit floor spacer. I think his reverse dunking only is really funny. If you've ever seen him play, he only does reverse dunks, even if they're just, wide open or if he goes for a contact dunk. It just it's really funny to watch. But he hasn't been this high minutes player. Okay, sorry. I have Shams up on here. So Matherin, Isaiah Jackson. Come on, you're not going to put that on Twitter? Come on. Shams, help us out. Help your brother out. But I liked Isaiah Jackson for this team as well. I thought about his ability to be this short roll center and essentially like their Isaiah Stewart's like a Isaiah Stewart light. I was interested in him being that coming off of his injury. But he hasn't been all that effective. And then they had James Wiseman, and he wasn't all that effective. They have had just a center by committee here. Oof. Oof. Jeez, I'm trying to keep up with what Shams is saying, and I have my volume all the way down. Maybe I should have captions, but he'll tweet it out in a minute. But he's he's breaking the news on ESPN right now. But they needed a center. We knew that when the moments they decided to um, let go of Turner and they decided to go center by committee, they knew that this was essentially going to be an interesting retool season, an interestingly bad season. And it's been a bad season throughout the totality of it. And the way that you made Siakam as effective as he was by having an effective center. And having a threat at that center position would help out not just Siakam, but Halliburton, of course, having an inside presence. And Zubats is just one of the most interesting pieces in the game. He is essentially just a post scorer. He has a really nice post hook. In the paint, it really does feel automatic. Last season was easily his best year, and I think he was on one of the defensive teams, if I'm not mistaken. I'll double check that really quickly. Yeah, he was the defensive second team last year, but he was so clearly really good when he was insulated with legit defensive pieces around him. And Zubats is having a good season this year as well, statistically speaking. 14 points, 11 boards, shooting about 71% from the free throw line, 61% from the field, which is essentially what he's shooting at. On all 2-pointers, he hasn't attempted a three this year, but he's one of the old school centers that operates inside the arc and is really good with his shots from inside the arc. I think he has really grown into an improved defender. I remember, 5 years ago, geez, that was 5 years ago, when the Suns played the Clippers in the Western Conference Finals, and he was somebody that, Chris Paul was targeting quite a bit, having him isolated. And obviously, you don't want him in isolation situations. That's why you have to insulate him with a couple of fun chess pieces defensively on the wings. And he got that last year, and he produced the best defensive season of his career. And he was limiting players to, shooting 10% worse when they attempted shots contested by him. He was a really legit defensive piece. I would have made the case for him to be first team because that wasn't the type of defensive season that I expected the Clippers to have. Now he comes over to the Pacers, and it's going to be different from Miles Turner. They had the benefit of playing with a ton of space, with Turner being able to stretch the floor. I think you're going to see way more pick and rolls than you did before with Halliburton and with Zubats. You're going to be seeing um, you're going to be seeing an inside threats that will be difficult to defend. I think like it does get clogged up quite a bit, but when you have a center that is as much of a threat as Zubats, that makes weak side defenses collapse a little bit and try to come in from behind and block away Zubats' attempts or the pass going to Zubats. That's going to lead to a little bit more corner 3-point jumpers for Indiana, as being able to put together some nice swing passes after the fact. I think that this is good process by Indiana, and if they gave up this year's first, then I think of it very, very differently, because the way that I envisioned it was, they're going to add Halliburton and a top 5 pick in the drafts. They're going to add Halliburton, top 5 pick, and Zubats now, if, they don't trade away this year's first. So Ben Mathurin, Isaiah Jackson, 2 firsts and 1 second for Zubats, and Kobe Brown. Ooh, okay. Interesting trade, at least from the picks perspective. So it is this year's first, but it's pretty heavily protected. So if it ends up being anywhere between picks 5 and 9, it goes to the Clippers. If it ends up outside of the lottery, of course, or if it ends up in the top 4, it ends up going back to the Pacers. And they also get an unprotected first-round pick in 2029. That is interesting. So the fact that they have as much as they do as far as the protection goes, man, that's really interesting. So they have so it's either going to be Zubats and Halliburton coming back, or it's going to be Zubats first-round pick and Halliburton coming back. They're going to need the lottery balls to really help them out. There's not really much room for error for this Indiana Pacers team. And if they end up with a top 4 pick, whew, that just makes everything much easier to stomach, especially if you're the Pacers. Oh man, I really like that trade a lot for the Pacers, man. That's going to be really fun. So it looks like it's going to be a straight 2-teamer. Ben Mathurin, Zubats. Ben Mathurin, Isaiah Jackson, 2 firsts, 1 second. Like, this is an interesting sell-off period for the Clippers right now. They are getting younger. They're getting significantly younger. Ben Mathurin on the surface is a really good scorer who has shown an ability to get really hot and be this microwave scorer. If you guys remember, I think he had a 30 ball in the finals last year where he was shooting extremely effectively. He was drawing fouls. He is an effective offensive player, and this year was no different either. I want to look up his stats. 18, 5, and 2 assists a game on 43, 37, 88 shooting splits, where he is shooting about 6 threes a night, attempting 13 shots per game, the most he's ever attempted in his career. Man, he's a good piece, man. He's coming up on a contract extension this offseason. And I think that it would be smart and wise for him to get I don't know, you can definitely talk me into like ADMs for him as like a reasonable price for him. But imagining that next to Garland and to Kawhi. I will say that in regards to Mathurin, his playmaking does need to take a little bit of a jump. And I'm not saying that he needs to be averaging 4 or 5 assists, but he definitely has the tendency of when he gets inside the arc, he's going to put up that shot. He's going to try to draw a foul, and it's because he's good at drawing fouls. Do not get me wrong there. But Ben Mathurin does need to tone down as far as the tunnel vision goes. And especially on a team like this now, where Garland is going to command some touches where um what's his face's name? Kawhi Leonard is still averaging 28, 29 points per game in the best season of his career, or one of the best seasons of his career. So it's in a situation like this, it's going to be an interesting maturation process for Mathurin. Isaiah Jackson and his value has been completely tanked just based off of the fact that he's coming off of a torn Achilles. He tore it pretty early on into the season last year. He comes back and he's 6 points, 6 boards per game. Nothing to rave about him. He's a $7 million contract that'll give you a good 17 minutes per game. He'll put together like a couple of fun lob attempts. Like you could definitely put something fun together as far as like his pick and rolls go. But nobody of consequence for this team for sure. Where was I going to go with that? The first round picks is where it gets interesting. It's nice that they have an unprotected pick now in 2029. And that goes hand in hand with the fact that they are very evidently trying to get younger. We know that beyond 2027, they're going to try to get a little bit younger. That they really had a 2-year window with the James Harden, Kawhi Leonard era. Now they get rid of Harden. Now they trade away Zubats. And they don't really have a center of their own that's all that interesting. They selected Niederhauser in like late in this past draft, but he's been playing up and down in the G League, nothing too special there. Isaiah Jackson isn't anything all that crazy to me either. And then it's 37-year-old Brook Lopez. Is he 37? He's old. He's definitely old. Oh, come on, give me an age. Brook Lopez, 37 years old. Thank you. 37-year-old center. As you're starting center in a year where you're having just a really good Kawhi year where you want to take advantage of it. I will be fascinated because it feels like it's sooner rather than later that we're going to see Kawhi on a different team. I'm not saying that he'll get traded at the deadline, but we're inching way closer to that and way faster, at a faster pace than we would expect. If that first round pick ends up, within that 5 to 9 range, it becomes an interesting conversation there. If they are to do that, I could certainly see a world where they can ship that pick off and maybe get another piece. I could see a world where they just ship off Kawhi and go a little bit more towards a youth movement with Garland and Mathurin and company. Man, that's a fun little surprise. I know that Zubats had always been in trade rumors, at least for the last couple of seasons. But man, this soon is definitely surprising. I definitely thought it was just going to be the Harden trade and that would be it. But it seems like just that inclusion of a first round pick this year was going to be important to this deal going over the finish line, and it does. And it does. Really fun trade for both sides. Definitely has pretty interesting ramifications heading into this offseason. Oof. We are about 25 minutes away from the trade deadline. The Pacers made a run at Walker Kessler, and they offered 2 unprotected firsts for Walker Kessler. Interesting. Why would the Jazz decline that? I would definitely have made that deal. But again, there's a reason why I'm not a GM. I think that it's good value then to have it be a protected pick and an unprotected pick for a better player in Zubats. I think Indiana did some really good business there as well. Hmm. But yeah, we're last 20 minutes, and I think I'm gonna continue to scroll through Shams's timeline and just see if I missed on any interesting trades or any good trades. Oh, I mean, I wouldn't say interesting at all, but Luke Kennard going to the Lakers. We'll quickly talk about that for Gabe Vincent in a second. It's funny to see, Gabe Vincent and a second go for something pretty, I think Luke Kennard's a pretty valuable asset. It doesn't change much in the equation for really either side. I think I have a fun time envisioning, I'm gonna go ahead and say it. The Statistically the best shooter in NBA history, and Luke Kennard it's really funny to put it in that way, but dude shot 45% from three in his career the whole time. We know who the best shooter ever is, but I'm, from the stats, he's really damn good at shooting in the NBA, Luke Kennard. Um, but it's fun to see that type of shooter be placed next to Luka, and you can imagine all of the lifts from the corner and just the way that Doncic plays basketball. Um, Luke Kennard will have a fun time, offensively speaking. That's a funny trait too. Um, but he's another piece that really isn't going to fix anything for the Los Angeles Lakers. You get a good shooter, and that's fun. That's nice. This team is still so deficient from an athletic standpoint. There is really no length. There is really no athleticism here in LA. And that's the core of building a legit roster around Luca, which they're going to have a hard time with doing this Lakers team, especially when they're just going to let LeBron walk for nothing. Um, they'll have some cap space open up, but they're going to go after restricted free agents and offer sheets. How often do we see restricted free agents that are legitimately in demand? When do we see them? When do we see them ever leave their situations? Even the likes of DeAndre Ayton all them years ago, who signed a $134 million offer sheet, we saw that get matched instantly. That's a restricted free agent of value at that moment in time. But you get the point. Peyton Watson is going to be in demand. Walker Kessler is going to be in demand, of course. But those players almost never leave their organizations, especially if they're a really good player at that. So, like the Lakers just don't really have a great pathway to building out the roster around Doncic in the ways that it should be, and really is the only way if Luka continues to play the way that he does. And it's an offensive system that features a lot of pick and rolls, contested step backs, contested jumpers, and really only passing when he needs to. I have a lot of thoughts on Doncic, but I don't want this to come off as like a hate run. He's still one of the best, still one of the three best offensive engines in basketball. He is a system as well. It's just a really complicated system to get down. And I think having Luke Kennard helps. Having a shooter like that helps. But they are still not really moving the needle as far as making their way towards championship contention, even for this season. But it's an expiring contract as well, and I think that helps in them trying to go after, some free agents. I do think so. And I'm fine with this for Atlanta too. They are very clear sellers. We have seen them pull back on a lot of other discussions that they've had previously, whether that be for Anthony Davis, for Zubats. We understand that they are in a transition period and they're just going to see what they have in certain players and what exactly you need to do to build around Jalen Johnson as your franchise player, and having an expiring contract while also bringing in a draft pick is a nice little pull for Atlanta to have. It's definitely a shame because I really did think of Atlanta as a top 10 to 12 team in the NBA entering the year. And I thought it was going to work out. But right now, this is a transition period. They are getting some expiring salary. Um, they're trading an expiring salary for an expiring salary, but also getting a draft pick out of it, which I think does end up as a win for Atlanta. And do I really need to talk about Gabe Vincent? He's not going to play much. He's not really a player of consequence. Okay. I have no idea if I was just stopping. I'm sure that I'm pretty choppy right now as far as like the quality goes. Got to figure that out soon. Got to figure that out soon because having this internet wired in has definitely sucked too. But Tyus Jones, Malachi Branham getting traded for each other. Again, not a trade much of consequence. Um, Dallas actually wanted Tyus Jones before D'Angelo Russell. That's pretty funny. But an expiring salary there for Dallas. It's good business to get themselves some expiring salary. Malachi Branham doesn't really have. Oh, interesting. Doesn't really have. Who was I just talking about? Tyus Jones, Malachi Branham doesn't really have much upside at this stage of his career. He's definitely um, a player who hasn't really had a. He hasn't really had a lot of run, especially during his first stint with San Antonio, but he doesn't really have skills that are of benefit when he plays because he's definitely not great off of the ball. He's not great on the ball either. He's not much of a playmaker at this stage. He definitely likes to try to score. He's also really not that much of a focused defender either. You're just really hoping that this is a development um, piece, really, for Charlotte, which I think is okay. Tyus Jones getting expiring salary for Dallas, I think, is important. We understand the trade that they made earlier with Anthony Davis, of course, and they're freeing up space to go get some um, to figure out a way to build out a good contender around Cooper Flag in the near future, because Flag is developing really nicely and he's developing pretty quickly here soon too. So it benefits them in that regard. Bucks and Suns is a 3-team deal. Usman Jang goes to Milwaukee. Nick Richards goes to Chicago. Okay. Man, that Clippers trade has a lot of consequence as far as like the Kawhi stuff goes. We know that they're moving off of it, but I'm trying to think of just like landing spots for Kawhi. Hmm, man, I uh I sit here thinking about the like I want who I actually want Kawhi Leonard to be on at this moment in time? Man, I would love for him in Detroit. If Detroit was able to somehow make a play for him in the next 15 minutes. I would love that because I don't know. I feel like he's being held hostage there right now in with the Clippers. And I just think about Leonard next to Kawhi, Leonard next to Kawhi, Leonard next to Cunningham. That's a better defensive piece to have than like Tobias Harris. That's a legitimate offense next to Cade Cunningham, which we just haven't seen at all this season. It's just a Cade Cunningham led offense, and having another offensive piece next to him would be very fun. Man, I'm just curious who the suitors would be because I think they're pivoting to that youth movement much sooner rather than later. Would love for him in Detroit when I continue to think about it. Solo Dolo, talk to me. Happy to have you back in the chat, my man. How you feel about the Warriors trade? I'm assuming you're talking about the Kuminga trade, the Porzingis deal. But yeah, I talked about it a little bit earlier. Kuminga is just he's a depreciated asset at this moment in time. It's very clear in the way that both of them operated in that trade by bringing in Porzingis, who's just you can see all the memes on Twitter in the world just about Porzingis' injury. I think Golden State's the way that they've talked about it. Their fans, it's really funny. But Kuminga right now doesn't make a whole lot of sense for Atlanta. This is clearly a salary cap move for both sides to me, especially since Atlanta has a team option on Jonathan Kuminga. So they'll take this next little bit to just see what they have in a young player and probably move on because the fit is not really all that clear with a team that's going to be headlined by Jalen Johnson. Tobias in 2026 is a joke. I wouldn't say a joke. I understand what you're getting at. I understand what you're getting at. Certainly not a number 2 option, that's for sure, and he's essentially that over in Detroit, and I'm not necessarily in agreement with that, especially when you're trying to make a contender around Cade right now, but when you take a look at, um, who else they have on that team, I think it's fun having a mid-post option for Detroit. I think having somebody that can, be really good in that area is pretty valuable, especially when you don't have many wings operating in post-up situations either. Not bad. Not bad, but I understand what you're getting at. They could definitely take an upgrade off of what's his face's name. You could definitely upgrade from him for sure, from Tobias. I feel like Kuminga would look great on the Lakers. He could go crazy around Luka. Let me envision it again because I remember they were in rumors a while ago around Kuminga or a couple of weeks ago around Kuminga. Huh. I wouldn't say crazy, but I don't think he's necessarily the piece. Um, I don't envision him as a piece that or an archetype that would fit well around Luca, if you get what I mean. I mean, I think the athletic tools definitely help, but he's not really much of a defender to me. He's not much of a shooter to me. I do think that in your best case scenario of Jonathan Kuminga in the NBA, I do think that he has the tools to, fit well around Luca. I would agree with that. I would agree with that. But I think that this is just a mindset thing. Kuminga has been very hell bent on, getting his $25 million a year when he hasn't really earned it. He's expecting, star player money when he's not a star at this current juncture. And I think a lot of it stems from the fact that he wants to see what he can become more so than um, what he actually is. And what he actually is right now is a very flawed offensive player who needs to buy into a different role that's not a primary option. But he doesn't want to see that at this moment in time. he wants to be a top option, and I think he will have some opportunity over in Atlanta where they're transitioning into a different era. I don't think it would work in LA at this current juncture, but I would agree that his best version of himself would fit well around Doncic and company. 10 minutes away from the deadline. Man, this is going to be interesting deadline. I would say that. It's been a very interesting deadline. If you guys got more questions, I mean, let's chop it up. We got 10 more minutes. We're probably not going to get any big time trades over the next 10. We'll probably get a couple more salary dumps, if anything. Hmm. Oof, get out of here. Okay. Yeah, interesting trade season. I will say it's definitely the more surprising trade season as far as like other players. Um, we had the big surprise trade last year of Doncic, of course, but it's just a lot more interesting pieces in there right now. I think it's really interesting for Jackson to be traded at this current juncture, Zubats to be traded at this current juncture. Davis going to Washington was ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. Um, we getting LeBron right now, trading Mobley right now. Boy, get out of here. I do think you end up with LeBron. I think that everything uh, will end up with LeBron in Cleveland in the summertime, and you'll have a tighter window. And I think that's the gift and the curse of trading for James Harden. Is that you're just sort of looking at a win now opportunity instead of um, really trying to keep that core four together and see how it develops. I can see why they did it, but it's definitely can definitely be interesting. Andrew, happy to have you in the chat, brother. Do you think Rob Dillingham still has the potential? Um, some thoughts. Do you think? Let me read that again. Do you think Rob Dillingham still has the potential? As some others thought, All-Star guard. Also, Tyus Jones is getting passed around like a blunt. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a fall off from grace for Tyus. I mean, at one point he was supposed to get himself a very legitimate contract, a an 8-figure a year contract in the offseason. He settles for a minimum, and now it's just not there. It's just not there with Tyus Jones. But do I think Rob Dillingham has like this all-star guard potential? Um, in some respects, yes. In some respects, I do think that he's kind of changed my thoughts about smaller guards coming out of the draft and being these fun scorers. I think he's a good scorer when he's on. I do think that with Dillingham, a lot of it is going to have to stem from him gaining a little bit more weight, and um it's disappointing in that regard because I think him being as skinny as he is allows for him to be this quicker twitch guard. There just is a ceiling with these small guards, and that's sort of been the main theme of this stream so far, is that there's just been this pivot away from, you know, Garland and Morant and Anthony Simons and these types of guards. Just pivot away from those types of players, and all of a sudden you have, you know, these guys that were once upon a time valued at just, multiple first round picks um and whatnot. Now they're getting shipped off as, potential salary dumps. You're seeing them, have to attach draft assets to get rid of these players. And that was the case here with Dillingham. With Dillingham, I do think that he was just in a weird situation where they expected a little bit too much from a guy that was a little raw. I wouldn't even say a little. He was really raw. Would have to refine his game quite a bit to be this all-star level player. Uh, whether that's in Chicago, which is where he's at right now, remains to be seen because they have 6 guards. They're going to play Simons. He's a really good guard. They're going to play Jaden Ivey, who's the higher potential guard. I hope Dillingham gets an opportunity to do so because I want to be vindicated in him being my number 2 prospect in that draft class. He just has to find a different team with more opportunity because right now, it's easy for teams to be out on him, and a lot of teams are. A lot of teams are. Do you feel bad for the Mavs now, or do you feel like they'll make up for that idiocy with Cooper? Um, both ways, I say yes. Like I do feel bad for them. They're always going to be connected to the horrors of trading away Doncic. But I mean, they lucked out with Cooper. They completely lucked out with Cooper. There's really no other way of putting it because if it ended up with them not getting the number 1 pick last year, we're talking about this situation being a whole lot more dire. I don't think they're necessarily making up anything. They lucked into getting, trading away one generational offensive player to another um really generational two-way guy in Cooper Flag. Um they'll have plenty more opportunities um to regain, their fan base. They are getting these expiring salaries. They are continuing to make way for potential other assets to come in and help build out a legitimate contender next to Kyrie and Flag. Um, I'm sure that everybody is now on the same page over there in Dallas, and um, they got a lot of trust to earn back. But I do think that's what they're doing as far as their process goes is not bad. I do think that the more that I read your question, the more that I think you're talking about the AD trade. As far as do I feel bad for them in that regard? To some extent, like at one point they were in conversations to go get a former number 1 overall pick in Risa from Atlanta. And if you look at some of the other teams that were interested, let's be honest, like bringing in RJ Barrett from Toronto would be a nice little headliner. It would be. Um, so in that regard, yes, but I understand the direction that they're going in with this roster and what they're clearing up uh, within their money on the table. I do think that they could have gotten a little bit more out of AD, but hey, I understand the process that they're going with. Okay, the Clippers aren't moving Kawhi. Thank you, Chris Haynes. We're at 1 p.m. Let's see if any deadline deals, late deadline deals come on through at the ticker. The Heat are the only team to not. It's funny. The Heat, they continue this freaking thing of being always connected to every type of all-star and saying, "Ooh, we're interested," or "Ooh, they want to come here. We're saving our assets to go ahead and get this player in the future." I'm done. Like everybody, including myself, continues to fall for that same thing over and over again. It's ridiculous the amount of guys that they've connected to. Remember Giannis 6 years ago before they made the Drew Holiday trade? Oh, we're saving this cap space for Harden. Oh, Harden's now available for trade. Oh, we don't want to trade away Tyler Hero. He's a good asset. Ooh, all of a sudden, Donovan Mitchell's out on the trade market. He wants to be in Miami. Now we're saving our assets. We're saving it for Luka. Luka goes to the Lakers. Then we see Giannis, staying put. They're just a stubborn organization that is trying to I mean, they're just really playing with their fans right now of continuing to come up with the notion that they are a team with legitimate desire from other stars to come to Miami, and it just really hasn't been. They haven't been able to recreate that magic of bringing in legit players in free agency through trade. We got to stop falling for it. Oh Jesus! Damn it, Solo. Maybe, maybe, but it really is funny to me that they go ahead and make zero move after all that talk. Um, this trade season. Okay, there will be no Sabonis trade. That's interesting. I definitely thought Sabonis would have gotten dealt. I remember seeing a bunch of stuff around Toronto. I thought for sure he was going to Toronto. I know that Scott Perry, that the Kings general manager, comes from the brass where he was really interested in what's his face's name, where they were really interested in RJ Barrett, and they end up making that move, or they end up not making that move for it. And I think a lot of that stems from the fact that Jakob Pertl's back injury, has been um, really concerning. And I think that they had to dump, him and send multiple picks out. And ultimately, that's something that Toronto doesn't do. They don't send out multiple draft picks for star players or anything of that nature. Even the Kawhi trade, all those years ago, 1 first-round pick and DeMar DeRozan and Pirtle. Move Eric Spoelstra to president, and they can get a new coach. Hmm. Hmm. I see a vision with that. I mean, Brad Stevens did that with Boston, transitioned out of his head coaching role to be the president of basketball ops, promoted from within. Did they promote within? No, it was Udoka. They brought in Udoka from Brooklyn. And then from there, after the Udoka situation, that's when they promoted within and brought in Missoula. That would be interesting because there's an assistant coach over in Miami, Chris Quinn. He was a former point guard in the NBA. I don't think for too long. He obviously wasn't this mainstream guard. I mean, he only averaged, shoot, is there career statistics for me? Yeah, he played 6 seasons, averaged 5 points a game in the NBA. But he's been a part of this organization for 11 years now, and has always been a legit candidate for head coaching spots at other teams, whether that's with the Suns, the Mavericks a couple of years ago, the Raptors. He's always been one of like the finalists there, and then he pulls himself out of the running and out of the discussion. I do think that if that hypothetical were to happen, it'd probably be a promotion within with Chris Quinn. Interesting. That's a very interesting thing that I haven't thought of myself. Yeah, and I know that Spoelstra definitely is one of these stars here. Come on now. He had once upon a time LeBron, Wade, and Bosh. And then it was Jimmy and Bam. Then it was Bam. Then it was Bam and Hero. Then back to Bam. Interesting. That's an interesting posing of that. Like I hadn't thought of that, Solomon. That's making me think quite a bit. It's making me think quite a bit. Georges Niang to be waived by the Grizzlies. Not surprising whatsoever. Jazz waiving Boucher as well, who they acquired in the salary dumping. Not trade deadline related, but do you think Khan still has a shot at Rookie of the Year, or does Flag wrap it up? Good question. I like that this is a nice little transition out of it. I do think Flag has it wrapped up. I mean, You're getting games from Flag at 18, 19 years old where he's almost getting to 50 points, and it's like an ethical 50 points where he's very legitimately getting into the that's a crazy one. Um, where what's his face's name? We were just talking about Flag. He was just having, he got close to 50 points per game. 50 points per game. He had almost 50 in a game as an 18, 19-year-old on the most ethical of um in the most ethical way possible. To me, at least, it was very fun to watch that game. Khan has certainly wrapped up back up. Like, he's definitely the runner up for sure. He has been highly efficient, which was the same way that he what's his face's name? Like, he has been efficient throughout the entirety of his career. I think it helps that he has like a legit point guard background, and I think that's why you're seeing a lot of confidence off of the dribble. But Knipple was always going to be this highly efficient spot up or movement shooter for this team. And he's played his role really well, and he's really just exceeded expectations that I had for him. I was thinking maybe like a cool 11, 12 on relatively similar efficiency, low volume, but he's shown a lot more on the ball, and I think that's really elevated his overall game. Um, and his overall fit for Charlotte, and the ceiling becomes a little bit more interesting with a player like this who was always a high floor player, but 18 in your first year where you're shooting 44% from 3 and almost 50% from the field on legit high volume. He's a good player, man. Knipple is really, really nice. And also shout out VJ Edgecombe. He started off the year really well. He's still playing at a really good pace and will be a first team all rookie this year. Um, and in most other years, he would be, one of the guys in discussion for sure. But the reaction that I had in the middle of that discussion was the fact that the Brooklyn Nets waived Cam Thomas. That's really fascinating. That's so funny. The Kings, man, the Kings are just a hilarious organization. But the Nets getting rid of Cam Thomas in this way after being, uh, you know, this guy that's just a really good microwave scorer and being a 17 point per game guy. That's really interesting. I'm sure that there wasn't really much value for him in the trade market because I'm sure that a lot of the issues other teams have with him is the same issues that Brooklyn has with him. All he's looking to do is score, and he's really good at it. And I think that's why he's going to get picked up rather really quickly, whether that be with, I can imagine Milwaukee doing so. I can imagine Cleveland going after him as well. Houston, like having another ball handler in there would be nice for him. But Cam Thomas being waived, like it's interesting that the Nets made the decision to find him a new home. That's a microwave score, but he has very legitimate playmaking issues. He has very legitimate um, defensive issues. There's legit effort issues there as well with him. And, I think some team is going to be willing to take him on, mainly because that level of scoring ability is very hard to come around. And um, it's just a very fascinating move. I really am curious where he ends up going because I think he can be a good player in a better situation for sure. How do you feel about rookies in the 2020s, guys like our age officially? Do you feel like they're not as hungry? Will we ever see another '03 or '84 class filled with talent? Um, hmm, hmm. I think the closest that we'll get to, at least in my opinion, I think about that 2018 draft class being insanely special. I want to take a look at this 2018 draft class and list it out for you. Again, that was the draft class with Luka Doncic and whatnot, and the Suns, with DeAndre Ayton selecting him over everybody else. We understand how that goes. But at one point, DeAndre Ayton, really good player. And then we'll just go through the list of all-stars. Luka Doncic, Jaren Jackson, Trey Young, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, Jalen Brunson, among other names. And then you'll have a bunch of these other guys that have just turned out to be legitimately good players. Wendell Carter Jr., a very legitimately good center. Colin Sexton, a very good scoring guard. Mikal Bridges, he's getting scrutinized by every single person in New York media because of the 5 first-round picks trade, but a really good player. Miles Bridges, good player. Michael Porter Jr. is averaging 25 a game this year. DiVincenzo, starting point guard over there in Minnesota. Grayson Allen hilariously has taken a legitimate scoring leap this year where he's doing a lot more off the dribble stuff. I know that you specifically, Solomon, you don't like Grayson Allen, but he's been awesome for Phoenix this year as an on-ball threat. Josh Okogie getting some minutes still in Houston. Kevin Huerter still bouncing around the league. Robert Williams finally getting minutes and playing games in Portland. Shamit's a solid player over with New York. Gary Trent Jr., starter. Bruce Brown, championship winner. It's a very legitimate class, 2018, and I think that's the deepest that we'll see a draft class be. Now, you asked about the 2020s, if we're ever going to reach that point. I mean, let's look. 2020 NBA draft, we'll start there. And I think this draft class has aged really nicely because I remember we talked about this as one of the worst draft classes. Anthony Edwards, all NBA level player. LaMelo Ball, all-star level player. Definitely depreciated all-star level player. But, LaMelo he looks like he's turning the corner as far as his professional career goes. Denny Avdia, all-star level player with Portland. Tyrese Halliburton, all-NBA level player. Tyrese Maxey, all-star level player. Desmond Bane was the 30th pick in that draft. I think there's some very good, talented players in this draft class in 2020. And I'm just trying to think, let's go through the others. 2021. Cade Cunningham, all NBA level player. Evan Mobley, Scotty Barnes, all-star. Şengün, all-star. Jalen Johnson, all-star. This is a solid draft class as well that features, Jalen Green. Again, probably a lot more players here that we're just still waiting to see if those guys pan out. Because Green, you definitely have to wait and see. Kuminga, probably not, but you're still waiting and seeing. Giddey, really good player in that draft class. We'll move to 22. 22 is interesting. This is aging not great. You have your all-stars. There's a couple of all-stars. But this isn't a draft class that's aging well. 2023, probably your best chance at it if we're looking at a 22 or an 03 draft class. It's probably the closest that we could potentially get to that. It's really Wembanyama, and that's it. But we're waiting on the developments of a bunch of other guys to really make their case. Like Amen and Asar Thompson. Brandon Miller is playing really well right now as well. 2024, probably not. I mean, that's not a really good draft class at all. And then this year is definitely a wait and see with pretty much all of these guys. But I think we all really like. I'll say keep your eyes peeled on this draft class. There is a lot. I think all of these guys have some really good really good potential. Even like I would say picks 1 through 11, and you could definitely discount Come On Maluwatch in that conversation, but 1 through 9 and pick 11, those guys, it's Cooper Flagg and Dylan Harper, the two clear-cut best players from this draft class, or best prospects in that draft class. Con Knipple has been the second best player in this draft class so far. VJ Edgecombe has been really nice. Ace Bailey, we're expecting legitimate jumps from and developments. Same with Trey Johnson, Jeremiah Fears, Yegor Demon. Cedric Coward was a guy that I really liked in the draft class. So that's probably your best bet. Like, I really do like this 25 class. Um, do we feel like they're not as hungry? I'll answer that question too. Yeah, we're not going to see, like, I think it's just a completely different conversation as far as, if they're hungry, like how you put it. We're not going to see many of those types of stories like with VJ Edgecombe, you know, living off of a generator, bouncing around within the city. That was a very, like, you could tell, like, this is a guy that has something to continue to learn and prove, and there's a very legitimate motivation with him. You don't see many of those types of stories within these NBA players right now. We'll have Jimmy Butler getting kicked out of his mom's house. We'll have the struggles that LeBron had to come up from. Um, Derrick Rose, John Wall. John Wall's a big one. I remember that point. He had a very legitimate story there. I also just think that it's a lot of payments. Like, you have to essentially pay your way to get yourself noticed. And it's not to say that folks don't do that, but it matters now more than anything else, where you essentially have to pay to be on those best teams, where you have a lot of y- we're not seeing like the coming from nothing stories all that often right now. And I think that's where the hungriness definitely comes in. I don't think that they are players who lack, I say that as far as like motivation goes, hungry to win and hungry to win championships, or hungry to win money. Like, there's a lot of different conversations within that realm, and I think you're talking about from a winning perspective. I do think there's less players in the league right now who are hungry to win championships. I think most people just want to, make a lot of money. And I think that in a lot of respects is pretty good too, especially with the family to support. That's the main motivation, so, help the family out. Yeah, it's a very multi-layered conversation when you say, they're not as hungry, for sure. There's different levels of hungriness within each player. I would definitely say that. But yeah, like, this one definitely has a lot of potential. I would agree with that. Why are the Suns scared to use Maluach? I think he always came in as a raw player. I think that if they were going to be as bad as we projected them of being, or as everybody projected them of being, I think that he would have gotten a lot more burn in the second half of the season. He is one that it has to play into his own body. He gained a lot of muscle in the offseason. He was, um, he was a interesting piece as far as the defense goes. In summer league, that was like my first thing. Like, I was able to hear him, and I was maybe 10 rows up in the lower bowl at summer league, and I was still able to hear him yelling and talking on defense. He has those aspects. Like, he can be a good defensive player, but is one that has, when he plays, gets into a lot of foul trouble. He is also a guy that, um, when he's on offense, he tends to lose the ball quite a bit. He gets stripped really easily, and I think that's just a matter of him building into his own body right now. And the fact that Mark Williams has been really good as a starter and Oso Ighodaro has been awesome. Like, he made Nick Richards expendable. Um, and Nick Richards was like an okay center who definitely wasn't great this season, but Oso has been awesome as a defensive piece. Like, you could definitely find um, you got to find the basketball account on Twitter, but they posted a lot about how much better the Suns team is on defense when he plays, and he plays a humongous part in that, being very switchable, and it just makes for not much of a need for Malawach in the lineup, especially when they're winning as many games as they do. They don't need to put in the development guys all that much. We can play them in the G League, which is what they have done. They've allowed them to play in G League, and they look the part when they play in G League. Both Malawach and Rasheer Fleming, who was their first pick in the second round, something that I was really excited about. They look really good in G League, which is telling me that I think that they're making the necessary developments going forward. I don't think that they really need to play right now. This is a redshirt season, and I think that's really nice to have that benefit of giving them a redshirt season, because it would be a lot more dire this season if they were bad and they had to continue to play them, and we don't have our own draft pick. It just becomes really difficult. But yeah, I mean, I sure hope so too. Like, I'll share my closeted take with you when I watch him, especially since he has developed a pretty legitimate jumper or a legitimate 3-point shot. He's almost like in my most delusional world, he's like a Joel Embiid light. Now, it's not to say that he will ever be Joel Embiid. That's a hard level to reach as a center, but he moves around really well when he plays. He's a big lumbering body that's legitimately fast. He has a smooth jumper, legit floor spacing ability, a very legitimate lob threat, and somebody who has shown to be a really great rim protector, especially during his time over at Duke. And in the minutes that he has played with the legit players on the roster, he definitely makes some noise as well. I really am, as a Suns fan, hoping for Malawach to be really good. And also, just like, you're able to read stuff on him, you're able to hear him talk. I'm trying to remember where, yeah, he came from South Sudan. And, that's an interesting story in itself. I very much am rooting for Kaman, just NBA fan wise, Suns fan wise. Like, I really hope everything pans out for him, especially for this Suns team, because they don't really have many more assets to use. They don't really have the opportunity to add development guys like this. Tyler Kolek is Peja Stojakovic reincarnated. He can dribble better, for sure. He's definitely off the ball. He's definitely an off the ball shooter than an off the dribble shooter, for sure. Who did I have Kolek compared to? That was probably the draft class 2024 that I feel like that was like my best work. Had him 26th ranked. Shades of Ty Jerome and Kirk Heinrich, backup guard running two-man game. He was really good at Marquette, man. He was really good at Marquette. He and, like, coincidentally, Oso Ighodaro, they had one of the best two-man pick and rolls in basketball, or in college basketball. He was really good in that regard. But we'll see, man. Like, they go get Jose Alvarado, and I have my reservations on them, but I don't think that Kolek has really earned the trust of Mike Brown at this moment in time. At least not yet. Not yet. I do like Kolek, and they spent a high second round pick on him, and I think we have seen and you certainly have as well, seen the flashes of a good off ball shooter and somebody that can operate a pick and roll pretty well. Yeah, I mean, I don't blame you then. I don't blame you for this comment, but I will say, the last 10 games, he's averaging, a cool 30 and 8. I talked about it with Philly, just how they were in this transition period of handing the keys of the franchise to Tyrese Maxey and eventually VJ, and that anything that they get from Paul George or Joel Embiid, they're playing with house money. Embiid's playing some really good ball right now. I know that it's really quiet at this stage, especially since, Philly isn't one of the three best teams in the East. But, he's playing some really good ball right now. And I keep your eyes peeled. Keep your eyes peeled for Philly, for sure. If you guys have, let's see, is there anything else? Ja Morant remained with Memphis, of course. Multiple teams were intrigued, but none were willing to make a serious offer. I mean, yeah, I know that Miami wasn't willing to make a serious offer for them. I mean, it was going to be Terry Rozier's suspended self and Simone Fontecchio's expiring contract. I'm just trying to see if there's any other news. And if you guys have a couple more questions, I'll stick around for another couple of minutes. Damn it, Jalen Green's out again. Fuck. Man, the fact that they continue to do what they do without Green and without Book, it's impressive, man. He sadly had to experience the Kolek experience. Yeah, I know. I was building this chair that I'm sitting in right now, and I was like, what is Kolek doing? But yeah, man, that's essentially the draft stream. I went on for 3.5 hours. I got some good comments from you, Solo, Andrew, Jackson, a bunch of y'all were able to tune in, and I appreciate y'all for tuning into the NBA trade deadlines reaction show. Let me know, because I do this for the deadline now. I do this for free agency and the draft. If you guys just want some live streams to talk ball in the chat, I would absolutely love to do that. Just chop it up, talk some hoops. Very much interested in that. But again, thank you guys for tuning in to Three-Peat Sports, and I look forward to talking more ball with y'all